Nation, what's going on? Welcome to the Irish Breakdown podcast, coming to you live on a Wednesday afternoon. Ryan Roberts, Director of Recruiting here at Irish Breakdown, joined by my man, Mr. Brian Driscoll, the publisher here at irishbreakdown.com. Happy to bring you all some more spring practice content as we move closer and closer. We are only a week away, 7 days from Notre Dame opening up spring practice for the 2023 season. So we're all jazzed up here. Obviously, the Pot of Gold offer extravaganzas Friday as well. So it is a busy week from a team perspective, from a recruiting perspective. Have a lot of content coming your way. So make sure to go to boards@irishbreakdown.com and check out the main site at irishbreakdown.com. For the show today, we have two segments that we're really looking forward to. One, we're going to talk about key position battles in the spring on the defensive side of football. If you missed our show yesterday, we talked heavily about some of the improvements and some of the strengths that we know about the defense for Notre Dame football heading into the 2023 season. Well, to expand on that conversation, we're going to talk about some of the key position battles and players that we need to see emerge, battle it out, and then ultimately who gets starting spots, who has key roles as reserves, rotation players. All that stuff is going to be started to work out this spring and kind of lay that foundation heading into the summer, heading into the fall. So big time. Second segment, of course, we're going to hit a nice little mailbag here today. So at any time in this podcast, as we're talking through some of the key position battles, throw some mailbag questions in the chat. Makes it a lot easier if you put that MB in front so that we all don't have to decipher too many things, right? We could kind of quickly work through some of those questions, obviously, in the second segment. But Brian, first segment, I know we're pumped up to talk about because this is one of the more fun times of the year because I feel like most fans are really optimistic about the 2023 season. They should be. Because there's a lot of talent that we discussed yesterday. There's questions to be answered, as there always is every single offseason.
For every team. Right.
For every single team in college football. But regardless, we're going to get a lot of action here soon. I wish we had a little bit more availability to some of the practices. But regardless, it's exciting times for Notre Dame football, man, and some key battles that are going to be raging on the defensive side of football this year.
I mean, why would Notre Dame want to allow people to see their players perform and write stories about them and promote them and hype them up? I mean, it's not like there's like a name, image, likeness thing that might help buzz for players coming out of the spring. But that's a different point. I'm excited about this football team because at the end of the day, the players are there to be successful. And this is, like you said, this is what I love about the spring is this part, assuming that the coaches allow position battles to happen. Hopefully they will. Marcus Freeman has always said, I'm big on competition.
Yep.
Well, I think this spring is going to be a perfect time for him to show that that's actually true or not, and it's on both sides of the ball, but especially on defense, because on defense, with all due respect, there's a couple starters who should have to be part of position battles this spring. If we're serious about competition and really building things around the talent of the players, which is what we always hear out of Notre Dame and every team in the country is everybody says, hey, best guy's going to play and we're all about competition, best man, blah, 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 blah. Everybody says that, but not everybody carries that out. We're going to find out if Notre Dame does because that means they're going to allow some position battles to rage. But it's fun to talk about and who's going to be in it, and see guys emerge and see who pushes and who fades for when the spotlight's on them, who steps up when the spotlight's on them, and then how these battles are won. And so I say not just who wins them, but how is going to have a big role in what kind of team this is. So, for example, we're going to talk about Viper in a second. If Jordan Patello is just the default Viper and he just wins the job and it doesn't matter what he does, I'm not necessarily going to be fired up about Viper. But if Jordan Patello is the starting Viper this year because he played great in the spring and Josh Burnham played great and Junior Tilamaka played great and Jordan held all those guys off as a starter, but they're all going to have a role, then you start feeling great about it, right? Big End is another one we're going to talk about. Same kind of deal. We'll talk about the interior D-line. We'll talk about linebacker, safety. The point is if the winners of these battles are guys that went out and truly earned it, that's going to make the defense a lot better. And, you talked about how yesterday's show we talked about the things that are strengths or should be strengths. Well, to me, these position battles go a lot further towards the concerns and question marks that we discussed yesterday as well. And how are those answered? And to me, it's like, okay, if Maris Luafau comes out this spring and has a great spring and he's disciplined and making correct choices on the field and making plays and being responsible and being accountable as a football player, right? I'm not talking about him off the field. I'm talking about accountable, meaning, hey, I got B gap and I need to hit the B gap, and I've got contain and I've got to hit contain. I've got to hit my landmark here on my drop. That's what I mean by accountable. If he's doing that and executing with some consistency, then all of a sudden you're like, hey, we're going to be a lot better at will this year.
Right.
And if not, then it's like, well, I'm not really sure how the will's going to be this year. So that's what I love about the spring, Ryan. And that's what because it's just, again, what is this 23 team going to look like? And these battles that are going to happen in the spring go a long way towards determining exactly what this football team's going to look like.
And I love the nuance of the conversation, right? Because there's a lot of layers to it, depending on who wins, how they win, I think is a great note that you make. But also, Brian, I think that competition is so important and something that Coach Freeman has preached so much that regardless if it is a true competition where two guys are legitimately or three guys are legitimately up for a starting spot, and how they attack this offseason is going to determine how things end. That's great. But also, I want to see even the guys that we know are going to be the starters, like a Joe Walt, for instance, right? Like, I want Joe Walt to get pushed. I want him to get pushed. Even if you know in the end it's not a true battle, I still want everybody to have to play up to their potential and feel like they're getting pushed from behind. Because in reality, Joe Walt knows he's going to play. He's going to start at left tackle, right? Blake Fisher knows he's going to play. Benjamin Morrison knows that he's going to play. But at the end of the day, I want some players to feel a little bit uncomfortable and feel tested, because that's what brings out the best. We always hear the iron sharpen iron conversation, right? Well, that really is where this comes down to, man. So, these position battles that we're talking about today are more about trying to figure out hierarchy at certain spots and do all that great stuff. But ultimately, everyone needs to feel pushed in these types of situations.
Well, and that's the thing, Ryan, is it's not always about a true competition for a starting role, right? Like Blake Fisher's going to start at right tackle. Joe Walt's going to start at left tackle. But the battle can also be, man, there's going to be a great battle at left tackle this spring. Like, hold on a second, guys. Joe Walt's starting left. No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about who's going to be that next guy in line. Who's going to be the heir apparent. And that's kind of where maybe you can challenge Joe Walt, where it's hard for me to convince a guy like Joe Walt, like, hey, man, you better play well or you're not going to start. Come on. He knows he's going to start. But maybe the challenge for him is, hey, man, you're not going to be here that much longer. And you have a legacy to uphold. And that's two parts. One part of that legacy is you got to go out and get better and do your job. The other part of that legacy is preparing the guy next to you. Because if you talk to young players that played under Quentin Nelson, they'll talk about how he impacted them and he held them to a standard and encouraged them and pushed them. And he had that role as a mentor to the younger players. Robert Hainsey was that way. Alex Bars was that way. Liam Eichenberg was that way. Nick Martin, Zach Martin, you go through the years, Ronnie Stanley, the role all those guys have a role in that. And so it can be, hey, these guys are battling it out, right? You've been there, be a mentor. And then that helps, focus him up. So sometimes those battles, and like when we talk about the interior D line, we all know who's going to start in the interior defensive line.
Right.
But that doesn't mean there's not going to be a fierce battle to say who's number 3, who's number 4, who's number 5, who's number 6. And those are the things that are going to be fun, Ryan.
Or can someone cement the foundation where they might be able to challenge for an interior spot down the road? If that
happens, then you're going to be really excited.
Yes.
And that's where you start getting fun. Like, hey, look, I know that Cam Hart's going to start at boundary or field corner this year, but man, when he was out during the spring, boy, did you see how Jaden Mickey played or how, Ryan Barnes or Christian Gray, whoever played, like, Cam's the starter. He's the dude. But, man, if he goes down or when his time is over, or you don't have to play him 75 snaps every game now because this kid stepped. Hey, look, we all know Benjamin Morrison's going to be – because, we're not going to talk about corner today. It's not on our conversation list. But,
sure,
Chance Tucker's not fighting for a starting job, but he's fighting for that number 2 job behind Benjamin Morrison. And so one of two things could happen. One is you're the backup. If Benjamin gets hurt, you go in. Or two is, man, Chance played so well that we now feel confident saying, hey, in a lot of these games, we're going to work Chance in every 5th or 6th series, 4th or 5th series, give him a series so we can maybe take some of the snaps burden off of Benjamin. And that way he's fresher November and going into the postseason. Now, you don't do that against Ohio State and Clemson, but you can do that against Tennessee State. You can do that against Central Michigan, against, some other teams. But he earned that right. And those are the things also that you want to see is what do those guys do this spring to not only maybe, challenge for a starting job, but challenge to a place where like, hey, Benjamin's a dude. He's an All-American, but man, Chance did great. So we can find ways to utilize him that then helps Benjamin, because then we don't have to play him every single snap of every single game. And now you're better. You're better now. And so those are all the different things you look at. And then if something happens to a player, a starter, you've got these younger guys that are ready, or these other guys that are ready to step up and play.
Right.
And that's what makes the spring a lot of fun.
And I think that there's a cliche that, competition breeds greatness, but I really believe that, man. I do. And I even think, like, we talked about Joe Alt a little bit, Brian. If I'm Coach Rudolph this offseason too, I want Blake Fisher pushing him and being like, hey, Joe, you might have been All-American last year, brother, but I'm going to be the best offensive tackle on the team this year, right? Like, you want that to happen, because then Joe Alt needs to step up his game. And it's not as competition is like, I hate that guy, I don't like that guy. It's competition is in, let's push ourselves to be the absolute best that we possibly can be. You need that on a good football team. The best football teams, they have that. Right? The Georgias. We can always go back to Georgia. You don't think there's a battle on that interior defensive line to see who's the next guy in after Jalen Carter this year and who's going to take over that mantle this year? That happens on a day-to-day basis.
It's like Cam and Benjamin. I want to see that. I want to see who had the most picks today. It's kind of, what it reminds me of? It's you ever watch Lord of the Rings? Do you remember in the last one, Return of the King, when I forget is it Gimli, right? The dwarf.
I think so. I haven't seen
and then Legolas are getting off the boat, and they're like counting the number of like bad guys they kill. It's like, that still only counts as one, because he kills that big elephant thing. Right? That's what you want to see. Like, hey, I only gave up 2 completions. I only gave up 3, and have that friendly battle of who. That's what good teams do.
Yep.
And that's what you want to see. But back to the original point, Ryan, there are definitely some specific battles that are going to rage this spring.
Yep.
And when we look at it, we're going to kind of go front to back. So these aren't necessarily in position of most important to least important, but we're going to go front to back. And just so you know, Archer, Ryan said he has seen Lord of the Rings. You did say you have seen Lord of the Rings.
I have seen Lord of the Rings,
okay.
yes.
Yeah,
it's been a little while, but I've seen the whole trilogy. I have,
yes. So when you look at it, Ryan, I think the position where there's the most legitimate battle for a starting job is at big end. And we're going to start there, because you obviously you lose your starting big end from last year, Riley Mills, who's now we anticipate is going to move inside, play more of a 3 technique role. He was the starter at big end last year. You've got Nana Osafa-Mensah coming back. He would kind of be the heir apparent of the returners. There's Alexander Ahrensberger in that conversation, I believe. Perhaps Tyson Ford could be in that as well, but he could also be inside. We'll find that out here in the spring. And then, of course, you've got the new guy, Javonte John Baptiste, from transfer from Ohio State, who's been a very, very productive player. His last couple of years at Ohio State, and was number 3 on the team in sacks last year, but it was only 1 sack behind the team leader and a half sack behind number 2, despite playing significantly fewer snaps than those guys. So you've got a quality 3-man group, Ryan. And so I think the battle here at big end to me is twofold. Number one is who's the starter? Actually, threefold, really. Number one is who's the starter? How deep does the rotation go? And what niches do different guys have? And I think that to me is where it ends, or where it begins and ends is right there. And for me, the thing that I'm curious about is, we'll start with the returners. Nana was a really good niche player last year, really good run defender.
Yeah.
Could come in and set the edge effectively. At times got a little bit overwhelmed at times, but overall was a pretty solid edge setter. Didn't bring a lot last year from a production standpoint, an impact production standpoint. Just kind of went in there and did his job, played hard, played physical. What we're seeing from him this offseason is we're seeing Nana do a lot from a leadership standpoint. You're seeing him be leader at workouts, going over to Ireland, for the stuff they're doing over there. But he had 14 tackles, 1 tackle for loss, and no sacks last year. He had 2 sacks the year before. Not a guy that's really had a ton of production in his career so far. Can he become more than just a do your job guy? Can he start to become a playmaker? And I think for Nana, that's going to go a long way towards determining whether he's going to stay in the role he was in last year, which is a very important role player, backup player, or can he challenge for a starting job? that to me is going to be the key of whether or not Nana stays in that role or becomes starter. He's got to be a more productive player on the ball. Tackles for loss, pressures, batted balls, sacks, all that stuff. We need to see a lot more of that from Nana this spring.
Yeah, and I mean, because he gives you a nice baseline, right? I mean, because at worst, he fits that niche where it's just like, okay, when he comes in, he's going to still be a solid piece to a big end room, right? Like you can depend on him. He's got that veteran side. He's got kind of that background. He's got the leadership aspects that he's adding even more this offseason. He's dependable, right? Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, to assume a starting role, in theory, you want a guy that's going to be a much more impactful football player, right? And because we talked about the Riley Mills impact last year at Big End, right, Brian? It's like, yeah, he had some nice moments, but you still need more production from an impact perspective. You still need more sacks. You need more tackles for loss. You need more penetration. You still need those types of things on top of doing the dirty work, taking on down blocks.
6 tackles for loss and 3.5 sacks. I mean, and so it wasn't enough production, but you compare that to 1 tackle for loss and 0 sacks, and it's a big difference. And it was 2 years in a row that we just haven't seen a lot of production from that position, Ryan, and that's a bit of an issue for me. We had the same thing in 2021 where the only time we really saw any production, like impact production from that position, was when Riley Mills played it against Virginia.
Yeah.
Myron Tungvaloa the year before as the starting big end only had 5 tackles for loss and 2 sacks and had 25 tackles. So we actually saw more production last year from Riley Mills at that position than we saw the year before. But to your point, it's not like it was in 2007-20 when the starting big end Adi Tagumba Ogundeji had 7 tackles for loss and 7 sacks. And obviously when Khalid Kareem had that job in 2019, he actually 2 years in a row, Khalid Kareem as the big end was a double-digit tackle for loss guy 2 years in a row. And honestly, that's what I care more about as a big end than I do sacks. Sacks are nice. If you can give me 3 or 4 sacks as a starting big end, I'm good. If your big end is a depth chart can give you 7, 8 sacks, I'm good. It doesn't need to be a 15 sack position like the Viper was last year. Give me 5 to 8 sacks from that position as a whole. I'm good. Anything beyond 7 or 8 is money to me. The way that Notre Dame uses the big end, again, it varies by, because it's not used that way.
Well, they do a lot. They do a lot of the dirty work. You're playing against tight ends. You're working against down blocks. You're working against
out on third down a lot of times, or they're moved inside. So
exactly.
But it's the tackles for loss that have to take a jump. It's the run game production, and then the pass game production. I want to see from that group is hurries, batted balls, things like that. Is good to see, but it's really the run game production more than anything has to take a big jump, and that's where if Nana is going to make a splash this spring, it's going to be there. And here's the thing I like about this position battle overall, Ryan. And again, we're going to start with the 2 returners first, and then we'll get to Javonte Jean-Baptiste last. They're going to be going to get some dudes all spring.
Yes.
And so they're going to get tested. So you feel like if they're making plays this spring against the first team, you feel like it's a little bit more impressive because of who they're going against. And that's going to be a big thing is they're going to get some long, talented dudes in Blake Fisher and Joe Alt. But they're going to have to step up. That's going to be a big key. And, we talk about Nana, a guy that I really want to see. Nana's got the tools to be a really good run defender. I think his block destruction is solid for a guy guy like him. It can get a little bit better. Last year was his first year where he really played like a ton of snaps throughout the season. His snaps in 2021 increased throughout the year. But in 2022, he was a key rotation guy from game 1 to game 2. For game 13, I should say. And so those are things that you want to see is you want to see his production go up in the run game. That's a big key for me, Ryan, for him this year.
Yeah. Because, at worst, again, he's going to fill a niche. But, even that niche, you just want it to be a little bit more impactful, right? Like you need that. And, honestly, Brian, it's not a fault of the big end position in general, but they do a lot of the dirty work, and I feel like we'd be having a different conversation about those guys from an impact perspective if the linebackers had been more impactful last year, right? Because you could be like, at least they're taking up multiple blockers, at least they're freeing up, and then the linebackers are able to flow and then make a lot more impactful plays. But the linebackers weren't as impactful as you want last year either. So you need to kind of look at both those positions and be like, you need to find some more impacts, whether it is, from a rotational piece, whether it's a guy stepping up and being the assumed starter, whether it's a 3-man, 2-man, it doesn't matter. But at the end of the day, Nana is going to get a chance to make a bigger impact in this spring and this offseason. And we have questions, as far as what the overall impact could be. We know the baseline, but is there a ceiling that Nana has tapped into? That's the biggest question mark right now.
Yeah. Next guy on the list is Alexander Ahrensberger. And this is a guy that really intrigues me. I have no idea why he didn't play more last year. Don't believe he was injured. I mean, I honestly couldn't tell you what the problem was. Maybe they were trying to redshirt him. I really don't know. He was listed as only playing 3 games on defense last year. I'm actually looking at his special teams chart now. He played several games on special teams. So he did not catch a red shirt last year. I don't have a clue, Ryan. I actually thought he was decent in 2021 in his limited snaps. He played almost 100 snaps that year. Thought he did some really nice things. He had a huge pressure against Cincinnati that resulted in Desmond Ridder tucking the ball and then eventually getting sacked by Isaiah Foskey. And then Notre Dame recovers that fumble, picks it up, and that's what helped Notre Dame get back in that game. So I don't quite get why his snaps dropped. I really don't. But he's tall, he's long, he's pretty athletic for his size, Ryan.
Yeah.
And he presents some opportunities. And I don't know if this current staff, if Al Golden and Al Washington just don't think very highly of him. I don't know if he struggled. I don't know what the reason is. But he's a guy that I hope we see more of this spring, to be honest with you. Because if you talk about a guy that has the total package for that position, size, length, strength, athletic tools, he's got it all. He just, for whatever reason, hasn't been able to put it together, or hasn't had a chance, hasn't been given the opportunity to put it all together, or maybe a combination of both. I hope that he makes his presence felt this spring, because if he does, he could either take charge of this position, or at the very least give them a really interesting rotation piece that can be disruptive. Because I think he has the most disruptive ability of the returning big ends, in my opinion. Just has to put it all together.
I was a fan of him last offseason. I really wanted to see him take a step forward because, like you said, you have seen flashes in the past, and obviously it was very small increments of opportunities, but he's still, productive in the opportunities he's had in the past.
You notice him when he's on the field. That's the thing.
Because
that's something you look for.
Yeah, because I mean, you hit on it a little bit already, but now with Riley Mills moving inside on a more, exclusive basis, you could argue, Tyson Ford, I guess, would figure into this conversation, but Alexander Ahrensberger might be the most talented kid in that big end room right now. He might be, when you take everything into account: the size, the length, the athleticism, the inside-outside versatility too, because, man, that length could be a real trouble opportunity against some guards inside, especially, right? It's like a sub-package dude. And I really thought that he was going to take a step forward in 2022 and, really kind of get a little bit of a role, at least a substantial role as kind of a backup piece. But for whatever reason, it didn't happen. I hope it didn't happen because Al Washington was making him his project that season, right? Like, let's get him ready. Maybe there's guys that are better right now, but long-term, if I give him a little more attention and practice on a day-to-day perspective, we can really get a lot out of him in 2023. I have no idea if that was the strategy. That's just my, hope, I guess, is because Ahrensberger's impressive, man. I mean, when I saw him last offseason, both in spring practice and in one of the availability we had for practice in the fall, he pops off, man. He's one of those first men off the bus, Brian. I mean, he's 6'7", right around 255 plus pounds. He's an impressive looking athlete. Can he be that guy? I have no idea. But if you're able to get the most out of him, that gives you some insane alignment potential, because like on third downs, if he's playing good ball, maybe you move him into 3-tech. You put Riley in at nose, and then you have one of your big ends rushing from the outside, and that gives you a lot more alignment versatility. So I would love for him to have an impact. I just don't know if there is a high opinion from the staff. Like, that's something that's to be determined at this point.
Right. And look, every coach does that. Every coach has guys they like, don't like, favor, don't favor. It's just a part of it. You just hope that you can see past it enough to allow someone to kind of step in and still play a key role. Those are the two returners. I mean, we won't talk about any of the incoming freshmen because they're not here. This is more of a spring conversation. And the one guy that there's the two current rising sophomores. I'm curious if they factor in here at all.
Yeah.
Aiden Gobira, to me, is more of a big end to me. And we've talked about him at Viper because that's basically what he was listed as last year. But when he got in the game against Boston College, he played big end. That's where he was. They had Josh Burnham at Viper. And if you watch the couple snaps that Aiden Gobira was on the field last year, he's twitchy.
Yeah.
He can get off the line. Now, I don't know where his body is now or where he's building it up, but he is a guy that, to me, should be moving to big end because he brings impact potential. Now, he's not there yet. I'm not saying that, but he brings that potential. And with a good offseason, could be a guy that maybe becomes a rotation guy because he brings the most potential as a pass rusher of the returners. Really explosive first step. I mean, going back to high school, watching him last year, there was one snap late in the game where it was him at big end, Josh Burnham at Viper, and Jalen Sneed was playing, I think, Rover.
This is against Boston College, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And you come off the line, and Aiden just poof, and Burnham poof, and you're like, dude, this is a different speed.
Yeah.
A completely different speed of athlete than we've seen from what's been playing these positions all year. And that includes Viper. I mean, Isaiah's a heck of a player, but like just the burst off the edge was like, wow. Like, okay, these guys can move. And that's why we talked about yesterday is like, look, they've got to get these guys on the field. They've got to figure out a way to get these guys in the field. And for me, Aiden Gobira, to me, is a guy that I would like to see this spring playing big end. And Tyson Ford moving inside the 3 technique and let him grow into a really disruptive 3 technique would be my ideal scenario. I don't know if Notre Dame sees it that way, but he's a guy that I could say keep an eye on him if he's able to kind of have a really big spring because he has got a lot of potential and he's got 4 years of eligibility left. So I want to see what they can do with Aiden Gobira this spring for sure. Here's my concern, Ryan.
Yeah.
I don't know that this is true. This is a general concern. This is not specific to Al Washington. So people hear me. This isn't a specific criticism of Al Washington. This is something that happens a lot with new coaches in general. They don't give the guys they didn't recruit that are young as much of a look. They'll play the veterans that are already there, right? Because they got to play somebody. But the younger guys, they may not give as much of a push because they recruited their guys. I'm not saying Al Washington is this way. This is always a concern I have when you bring in a new position coach. This is always that concern. In this instance, however, I hope that that's not true because if Al Washington is willing to take all these young kids and actually coach them up and realize that your job is to develop young players, it's not their own job. It's not up to Aiden Gobira and Tyson Ford by themselves to develop themselves. Otherwise, the coaches shouldn't get paid as much as they do. They're overpaid if that's the job, if their job is not to do that. Your job is to develop and coach these kids. And if a kid needs more work, then you spend more time with them because there's too much talent with that duo with Aiden Gobira and Tyson Ford not to have them pushing. And if they're not ready on day one of spring, then dude, if I'm Marcus Freeman, I'm sitting out Al. See that kid number right there? Number 90, Aiden Gobira, or no, it was 92, 91. If you don't get him ready to play, we're going to have a very long conversation this offseason. That's what a head coach is supposed to do. I mean, I've heard stories from people I know at Ohio State where they said Urban Meyer would do that with his coaches. You see this big-time recruit we just got? If you can't get that guy coached up and ready to play, then I'm going to find someone who will. I mean, that should be your job, right? And I hope that's the conversation that Marcus Freeman is having with Al Washington. And we're talking about him for now because we're talking about the D-line. Is if you can't get Aiden Gobira ready to play, if you can't get Alexander Ahrensberg ready to play, then I need to rethink if I got the right guy for this job. Sure. That's simple as that. And if he can't, but here's the flip side, because this is a hypothetical conversation. We're not saying Al hasn't done this. We're just saying in theory. On the flip side, if Coach Washington does sort of take them on as his pet projects and does develop them and push them and get them ready to go, all of a sudden we're having a much different conversation about the big end position. So again, there's the two sides of what it could be. We're not saying which one it is. We don't know.
Right.
So to me, if he's able to do that and get, to me, Gobira and Ahrensberger ready to go, that makes the whole room better because then you can keep Nana in his niche and just help him get better at that. And now all of a sudden you've got a really deep, long group of big ends that you all of a sudden it could become a strength of your defense.
And if you also have that moment where Al Washington's able to get Ahrensberger and, if he's able to get a guy like an Ahrensberger ready to go and to be a substantial playmaker this year, and then maybe an Aiden Gobira is in that conversation as well, it also strengthens a couple different spots too, Brian, because we talked about Tyson Ford. We literally talked about him on the phone earlier. Like, how great would it be if that move is able to put a Tyson Ford inside, maybe exclusively if he's able to hold weight, and then that starts strengthening the interior defensive line as well. So that has ripple effects on this roster potentially, right? Because it's like if Aiden Gobira can hold weight and you're able to really develop him properly, then hey, Tyson Ford is freed up to maybe be more of an impact penetration style player inside in his niche as well, like if he's able to develop as well. So I think that that's really what you want to see. And I mean, I think it's like the Javonte Jean-Baptiste conversation we had when he first came. It's like you strengthen two positions because now you can move Riley Mills inside on a more exclusive role there. And now you just made your big end position more productive potentially. You made your interior defensive line more productive potentially. I think that that's a big thing for Al Washington is if he's able to get the most out of some of these toolsy kids, you're strengthening not only the depth of that position, but maybe another one as well. Yeah. So
right. Because I don't know if Aiden is in year 2 going to be physically ready to be the guy.
Right.
Because I don't think he was physically ready to play last year. Like my comment about the BC game was not like, man, this guy should have been playing all year. I don't think he was physically ready to play last year. I have no complaints with that. I'm simply saying now you're going into year 2. The tools are there. Get this kid ready to play. If it's 15 snaps a game, if it's 40 snaps a game, now in year 2, these kids should be part of this mix some way, somehow. And then, let's say he gets 10, 15 snaps a game this year. Then next year he's going into a situation where now he's ready to take the job over. Those are the things that I want to see, Brian, from that group. So, and then finally, Javonte Jean-Baptiste is a very interesting player because he's not your typical big end. No. He's going to be around 250, 255 by the time the season starts. Similar in size, similar in body type to Adetokunbo Ogundiji. And so to me, I'm curious to kind of see what he's going to be able to do. Ohio State didn't really necessarily play big end the same way that Notre Dame did. Both of their ends kind of had to do similar things. It was much more of a traditional 4 down front. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, they try to recruit the defensive end position pretty similarly. Like all their guys are, outside of maybe Zach Harrison, like they're all kind of similar size players.
He's just freaky, right?
Yeah.
But so I think he can handle the job. I think he can play the run. I think he's a solid run setter, edge setter, I should say. He's got to get better at that. And I think that, going into year 6, he's gonna be excited, not excited, but he's gonna benefit from the strength conditioning program a little bit, just continue to add on to it. He's experienced is what I was going to say, not excited. So I think he'll be able to handle the position. It's just about, okay, is he a 40 snap guy, or is he got to be part of a pretty evenly split 3-man unit? Is he going to be the starter? Is he going to be the number 2? I think that's what we're going to see. But here's the one thing that he brings to the table that none of the other ends on the roster have. And that is a proven pass rusher.
Yeah.
Now, his sack numbers are not going to knock your socks off, right? You're not going to look at a guy that had 75 sacks in his career. I'm being obviously hyperbolic. But when you look at his snaps his production as a sack guy on a per snap basis, he put up good numbers, Ryan. Yeah. He was this past year, he had, I think, 4 sacks, I think is what I saw from the Ohio State numbers. I think, let me pull this up real quick. I think he had 4 sacks this year. But he was a guy that you look at and say he was a key rotation player for the last 3 years, really, for Ohio State. Played a good number of snaps as the number 2, and a guy that on a per snap basis had very good numbers if you break it down. So
his win rate was really good, if I remember correctly, this past year.
It was. And so I'm actually going to pull that up real quick, Ryan, while we're talking about it.
It was like 19% or something like that, right? Like it was high.
I don't know if it was this year or last year. I'm looking that up right now because I know one of the last 2 years he had a really, really successful. He was very successful in that regard, and so he's got the ability to do it. He's done it. I mean, he's proven that he can get after the quarterback in limited opportunities throughout his career. And so he's the one guy that has shown that ability in college. And I think that's something that should benefit him, in my opinion.
And because I feel like he's going to be playing with a lot of fire this offseason as well, Brian, because what's the reason that Javonte Jean-Baptiste is here? He's already been a key position, key producer in a rotational role at Ohio State and for 5 years, right? Like he's been there for 5 years. The last couple, he's been a key player at the defensive end position in a rotational role. Why is he coming to Notre Dame? Because he wants to be the guy, right?
And he's not going to be that. The guys they have starting at defensive end are just better than he is. I mean,
exactly. Like JT, Jack Sawyer, like that's their guys at Ohio State, and for very good reason. Very talented football players, obviously. Javonte made this move to Notre Dame because he could have went to the NFL and he could have chased those dreams this offseason. Right. He came back because he wants to be the guy. And I have to think that everything he does this offseason is going to be to attack that goal. Let's get there. Let's have 8 sacks as a senior at Notre Dame in your 6th year and then go to the NFL. That's what I envision is going to be his fire this offseason. So he's going to be pushing everyone around him, right? Like Alexander Ahrensberger, Nana Asafa-Mensah, and whoever else keys into this position role, they're going to have to live up to, I think, that fire that he's playing with, because as long as he comes to work every day, he's going to have a good opportunity to maybe be the guy. But that type of fire and that type of urgency to have, because it's his final year, man. This is his last shot. He can't come back for a 7th, you know? Like this is it right now. And if he has that fire in his belly to try to get that accomplished, that makes everybody else better too. Because now guys are chasing him and saying, like, I know you've been here for 5 years in college, man. I know this is your 6th year, but I want this role too. Like, I'm sorry if you get phased out or you get relegated to a rotational role, but like we have to step up to our game every single day. So I'm excited about Javonte because he brings proven production in snap basis. He brings leadership. He brings experience. That's all great things. And I also think that he has the potential to really push that room and demand the best out of the guys around him that are competing with him.
Yep. So there's guys there, Ryan. I mean, this is the key. There are guys in the room for this to be a solid position. What we don't know if it's good enough to be beyond a solid group. That's the question. And for that to happen, I think there's 3 things that need to happen for me. Javonte Jean-Baptiste needs to be able to take his pass rushing production over limited snaps and be able to project that over an extra 100-some snaps. So last year at Ohio State, for example, when you look at what he did last year for the Buckeyes, he had I'm pulling it up here real quick. He had 132 pass rushes and he had 14 pressures in those 132 pass rushes, 4 sacks, 3 hits on the quarterback. That's pretty good numbers on that type of percentage. His win rate last year, I don't think that's total. I don't think that's actually correct. But they had him at 26. I don't think that's actually correct. I think that's a different number that I'm looking at. But let me just see here real quick. PRP. Okay. So this would be what it is, Zach, Ryan. It was 14.3 was his PRP, which is more close to what the actual win rate is, right? It's sacks, hits, and hurries relative to how many times they rush the passer. Yep. He led Ohio State last year with 14.3. The year before, in 2021, I believe is when he was higher than that, and he was at I can't find it here, but anyway, the point is he had a pretty good success rate. 14.3 is very close to what Notre Dame was last year with Isaiah Foskey, just for context sake. So he was at 14.3, and if you go to Notre Dame last season and you look at Isaiah Foskey was at 14.0. Now, here's the interesting thing. The guys, if you look at Ohio State and Notre Dame combined, number one guy of someone who had more than 50 pass rushes was Jordan Patelho, who was at 25.
It's insane, man. Yeah. We talked about this yesterday, but that is just for people that don't understand pass rush win rate, like anything over like 18 is great. Like really, really
I think Will Anderson was like 19 the year he had like a great year. And then Alexander Ahrensberger in limited snaps was at 25 as well, but he only had 6 pass rushes. Yeah. Number 3 was Javonte Jean-Baptiste. Number 4 was Isaiah Foskey. Number 5 was Zach Harrison. Number 6 was JT Luau. I don't know how to pronounce his name. Number 7 was Tyler Friday. Number 8 was Justin Adamiola. Number 9 was Jack Sawyer. And number 10 was Riley Mills. so you're talking about Notre Dame is going to have, if you look at last year's defensive end pass rush success rate from between Ohio State and Notre Dame, the 3 highest ranked guys are all back and playing for Notre Dame this year.
Yeah.
Now Alexander, that's an asterisk because Alexander Erzberger's rate came on 6 snaps, right?
Yeah.
But the top 2 guys that had at least 50 pass rushes are 2 guys that we expect to be potentially the starting ends at big end and Viper for Notre Dame this year. That's part of where my excitement about, because what was one of the concerns we had yesterday, Ryan, is where's the pass rush going to come from? Well, if Javonte Jean-Baptiste can force his way into the starting role, because he's going to have to beat out Nana and Alexander Erzberger and those guys. I mean, it's not going to be handed to him. Trust me, it's not going to be handed to him.
Yep.
If he wins the starting job, you start to say, like, hey, in your base defense, you have a much better shot at generating a pass rush this year out of your base defense than you did last year, because Botelho potentially could bring a similar effectiveness to Foskey as a pass rusher, but you're going to get a big jump. And even if it's not as good, it's a little less, but you have a chance to be significantly better rate at the other position. Right. When you look at where Notre Dame was last year, because Notre Dame's 2 guys last year, Nana was at a 2.9% rate. And then Nana last year had 2 total pressures on in this thing, 2 total pressures on 156 pass rushes. Javonte Jean-Baptiste had 10 on 132 pass rushes. So, and this is on true pass sets, right? So that's a really good rate, really good rate. Like I said, he had 10 on 132 pass rushes. Isaiah Foskey had 21 on 311. So again, you look at it and you say, hey, this is a pretty good opportunity here for 2 guys to be really productive and have some success. And so that's where you say, why did they recruit that kid? That right there, that's why. Yeah, that's why they recruited Javonte Jean-Baptiste, because he can get after the quarterback. And Notre Dame needs to find ways to get after the quarterback with their front more consistently than they did last year. The overall sack numbers ended up being good. But as you and I both know, they got some sacks in spurts. They got some sacks in some late game situations where the other team was down. Cal, they got some big sacks late against Cal. Got some sacks against UNLV. And they got some late game sacks that sort of padded the stats where you weren't getting enough consistent pressure early in games.
Yep.
And you couldn't get it into the big games. You couldn't bring down JJ or CJ Stroud. You couldn't bring down Caleb Williams. You got pressure on him, but you couldn't bring him down. Let him get outside contain. This year, if you say, hey, if you really want to be an elite defense, you need a defensive line that can create pressure. And if you can't get hardly any production from the big end, because the only even competent big pass rusher from the big end position last year was Riley Mills. Yeah. Now, we've seen Nana flash it in practice. We didn't get a chance to see him do it in games. So I'm curious to see if he can do it, take it to another level in games. But the reality is Jean-Baptiste gives you a guy that has a proven track record, limited, but still a proven track record as a pass rusher from a position that'll be very similar to what he's asked to do at Notre Dame. And so if he wins that job, you're going to feel pretty good that at least the pass rush is going to be better this year. There's no doubt about that.
Which matters, because you talked about the key games last year. You saw some great quarterbacks last year, obviously. You saw CJ Stroud, who's going to be a top 5 pick in the 2023 NFL draft. You saw Caleb Williams, who is by far the favorite to be the first pick in the 2024 NFL draft. You saw Drake May. One thing that all those quarterbacks have in common, though, Brian, they're not very effective when they're on their back, right? When they're getting hits, when they're getting constantly pressured. Like, yes, Caleb Williams is going to make some magic happen at times working against pressure. But I've never seen a quarterback that is better when harassed versus when they're from a clean pocket. I've never seen a quarterback that excels more in adverse situations. So in that regard, Notre Dame's going to see some more talented quarterbacks in 2023 to get more impact. And again, it doesn't always have to just be sack numbers. It's pressures. It's quarterback hits. Harassing quarterbacks is a big deal, and they need to find more production on a consistency basis from that big end position. And the great thing about Javonte Jean-Baptiste, though, is even if he doesn't end up being the guy at big end, it gives you a great baseline. You know that he's been productive as a part-time player. He gives that to you, which is awesome.
And if somebody beats him out, then you feel like, okay, they're going to be really good. You made a comment. I want to make sure that you said that they're going to face better quarterbacks this year than they did last year.
No, I said they faced great quarterbacks last year, and they're going to face more good quarterbacks this year. No,
okay.
not
I was curious about that one because I was like,
no.
I will say this. I don't think there's a trio like the group they faced last year. CJ Stroud, Drake May, and Caleb Williams. But I will say this, top to bottom, there's even more good quarterbacks on the schedule this year. You still have Caleb Williams. Whoever they play this year, whoever starts at Ohio State this year, and again, I know Notre Dame fans don't think this, and I don't even know if Ohio State fans think this, but I'm just telling you, track record shows that since Ryan Day's been there, it hasn't mattered who's under center. The guy's going to put up numbers.
Yes.
And Kyle McCord was a guy that I liked a ton coming out of high school. I didn't like Devin Smith as much, or Devin Brown as much, but I do like Kyle McCord quite a bit. But you look at it, you're still going to face Caleb Williams. You're still going to face whoever Ohio State has. Clemson's going to be upgraded at quarterback this year with Cade Klubnik, in my opinion. Riley Leonard's on the schedule this year.
Yes.
Brennan Armstrong's on the schedule this year. You're going to face Jack Plummer again, but he's going to be in a much better situation this year than he was with Cal last year. Now that he's at Louisville under Jeff Brom.
And he made some plays against Notre Dame early in the game last year.
They let him run around. Here's the crazy thing. They will have faced Jack Plummer now 3 years in a row.
Three different
teams.
It's wild.
I'm serious. He started against them for Purdue in 2021. He started for him against Cal last year. And he's starting for he'll probably be the starter at Louisville this year. So that's just an absolutely wild stat.
Transfer portal era, man.
Right,
what are you going to do?
Right. Yeah. They're going to face Phil Dracovic at Pitt, and I'm not sure who the quarterback's going to be at Stanford and Wake Forest this year. But there's a deep stable of quarterbacks they're going to face this year.
Yeah,
and there's a few guys on that list, Ryan. They're not easy to sack. Right. I don't think Brennan Armstrong's super easy to sack. He's not as hard as some of the others. You can bet that the Ohio State guy, if it's Devin Brown, I think he'll be easier to sack. Kyle McCord won't be easy to sack. He's a big kid and a good athlete. He won't be easy to sack. Riley Leonard's not easy to sack, in my opinion, especially going into year 2. Notre Dame, Jack Plummer should be easy to sack, but he wasn't for Notre Dame last year for whatever reason.
He's a decent athlete, man. Yeah, he's a big guy. Yeah. He's got some of that.
Caleb Williams won't be easy to sack. Say whatever you want about Phil Dracovic. He's not easy to sack if the line's competent. Right.
Notre Dame fans have seen that he's not easy to sack.
Right. Now, when 4 guys hit him at once, it's a little easier to bring him down. And then Cade Klubnik won't be easy to sack in year 2. So the D line's going to have a much tougher task week to week than it did last year, where really, you look at last year's schedule, Ryan, and you had the 3 dudes at the top, right? And you had Jaron Hall, but there's also a lot of Henry Colombi is not a very good quarterback, even though Notre Dame made him look like one. UNLV didn't have a very good quarterback. Syracuse didn't have a very good quarterback. DJ Uiagalelei is not a good quarterback. Navy didn't have a good quarterback. Emin Moorhead is a young kid that was overwhelmed in that game. He was overwhelmed in that game. And then the other quarterback they had on the schedule last year was a good player was the kid from Stanford, right? Tanner McKee.
Yeah.
So you didn't have the depth that you're going to face this year, in my opinion. And so it's not the trio of CJ Williams and Drake May, but it's really good. And it's hard guys to sack. So this position is going to have to be good. The other D-line position, and we spent way too much time on Big End, kind of partly for a reason, because that to me is the one where there's the biggest question mark.
Yeah.
At who's going to start. Viper, Ryan, to me, when I look at the Viper position, it's not so much about a battle for the starting role. I think barring him missing time or just taking a big step back, we know who the starting Viper is going to be. It's going to be Jordan Patelho. Here's the question at Viper, Ryan, is who else plays at Viper and how much?
Right.
And that's going to be the question. So you've got Jordan Patelho. He's going to play. How much? We'll see. But after that, you've got 2 guys to me that I'm very curious to see how much they can force their way onto the field, and that's Junior Tuihalamaka and Josh Burnham. Josh Burnham, I'm going to contend, is pound for pound the best athlete they have on defense. Pound for pound, inch for inch, the best athlete they have. You're talking about a kid that had a 37-inch vertical and a 10.5 broad jump this year at 240-plus pounds, 245 pounds.
And also did 23 reps at 2 1/4. Yes. Don't forget that part.
Yes, with very long arms. The kid's a freak. Now it's up to Al Washington. Again, this is what's so it's partly what's frustrating, but also why I'm excited.
Yeah.
Because Al Washington is not working with bums this year. Like, there's this perception that they still don't have a lot of talent. Like, we've seen Archer, right? The Ohio State guy. Love Archer, but he's like, yeah, the D-line doesn't scare me. Okay, that's fine. Based on what we've seen, that's fine, whatever. But there are not a lot of teams in college football that have an athlete like Josh Burnham. I mean, he's a longer, more athletic version of Drew Sanders, athletically. He is. Look what Drew Sanders did at Arkansas, right? I mean, and Josh Burnham's a more explosive, longer, bigger athlete, in my opinion. You may disagree. That's fair. But in my opinion, that's what he is. Now, is he as good of a football player as Drew Sanders? No, he's not. Not yet. But that's my thing is, get that guy ready. If you can't get him ready, then what are you doing here? There's this notion that, well, it's up to the play. No, it's not up to the players. If it's up to the players, then give them the coaches' salaries if it's up to them. Right? And you can hire me and Ryan to just determine which of them, because if they're going to determine it themselves and they're up to develop themselves, then you just need babysitters. You don't need coaches, right? That's not the job. This dude's a freak. It's my job to do whatever I can to get him ready to go. Yeah. And then you've got Junior Tuihalamaka, who I don't know if he brings sort of the explosiveness, but he brings a physicality, and he's got a great instincts. He's got toughness. I still wish he was playing linebacker, to be completely honest with you. But, man, there's some talent there. If you can't get these guys ready to go, man, if you can't get production from the Viper position, then, I'm sorry. You got to find somebody else.
Yeah.
You got to find somebody else. If I'm Al Washington, he should be licking his chops ready to coach this group, I would think. And if he's not, then, again, what are we doing here, man? What are we doing here? Because this is a loaded group, Ryan.
We've seen a transformation of the position a little bit too, Brian. Like, I mean, Isaiah Foskey was more of a true 4-down style player, right? Like, you don't want him dropping in coverage a ton. He can do it at points. We've seen that in Notre Dame career. But the 3 linebackers that you just mentioned all have some sort of linebacker backgrounds, right? Joshua Burnham came in as a linebacker, transitioned to Viper early on in his career. Jordan Botelho has played inside linebacker, has played Rover, has played Viper. And then obviously you mentioned, Junior Tuihalamaka, who was literally a Mike linebacker in most of his career so far at Notre Dame, although it's just one season, right? So you're talking about 3 guys that have the ability to drop into coverage. They have the ability to play a physical style and setting the edge, and they have an opportunity to get after the quarterback a little bit. We've seen a evolution of that position. It looks much more of that hybrid drop end linebacker spot than what it's typically supposed to look like. And there's a lot of talent there, man. There's no doubt. I mean, Joshua Burnham at 6'4 plus, 245. You mentioned all the athletic numbers, right? I would contend, and I think you were kind of getting at this, right, a little bit, is that if you can't get him ready to play as a sophomore, that's a failure. It's a failure, man. He has to play in some capacity. I'm not saying that he has to be the guy at Viper, but he has to have some production this year, man. He has to have some impact this year. Jordan Botelho, we need to be more consistent. We need to be more dependable. But that dude is talented, man. Yes. Super, super gifted football player. And Junior Tuihalamaka might be the least twitchy of the group, but also incredibly physical. I know you've seen some of the work he's done this offseason with his personal trainer, man. He looks good. He looks smooth. He looks explosive.
He should still be playing Mike. I'm sorry. He should still be playing Mike. That's a mistake. I'm just going to say it. Not that he can't play Viper, but he should still be playing Mike. Whatever. It is what it is. But he should still be playing Mike.
But you got 3 talented cats, man, that should offer high upside in that Viper room. As a group, they should be incredibly productive. Is there one guy that I'm going to say should have 10 sacks? No. But I'm saying together, your Viper unit should not take a step back. They should be as productive as last year with all of those roles together and all of that upside considered.
Right. And again, we're not talking total theory, what they were in height. With Jordan Botelho, we've seen Jordan Botelho 2 years in a row. When he plays, he moves at a different speed than most people do at that position. He just does, So it's just, I'm excited to see what it can do, but I'm also kind of nervous about it because as of right now, Al Washington has not shown me he can get these guys ready to play. That's my big concern. But man, there's a lot of talent at that Viper position. A lot of talent. I mean, Junior Tuihalamaka was a top 100 recruit. Jordan Botelho was a borderline top 100 recruit. And Josh Burnham was a top 100 recruit for all the people that obsess over start rankings.
Yeah.
Right. And all three of them were mentioned as potential ends coming out. I even mentioned Junior could play this, but when I said it was more of like a nickel situation, but Burnham, we said when he look, this kid could end up outgrowing linebacker pretty quickly. And that's what happened. He just got too big too fast. Yeah. And he just looked more, he's built more like a Viper. And then of course, Jordan Botelho has played Rover in 2000. I mean, literally Notre Dame's starting Viper this year is a guy that played Rover in 2021 at 245 pounds.
Yeah.
Right. So don't talk to me about Notre Dame doesn't have the athleticism of the position. You got a 6'4" plus 245-pound redshirt freshman with huge wingspan that ran a 4.6 in high school, has got a 37-inch vertical and a 10.5 broad, which is better numbers than what Isaiah Foskey just put up. And Isaiah ran a 4.58. Right. And you've got Jordan Botelho, who's 250 pounds, who played Rover 2 years ago. Rover. You know what I mean? And then, there's a ton of talent there. My question is, how does that battle rage this spring between Burnham and Junior? But also, how much can those guys close the gap on Botelho to say, hey, you need to play all of us? Which then, to me, benefits Jordan Botelho because he's not as big as Foskey was. If Jordan Botelho can go from playing, just when you look at it, like I'm going to look at Isaiah Foskey last year. Isaiah Foskey last season played a total of, I think he was over 600 snaps. He was at 563 snaps last year. He was at 564 the year before. That's a pretty decent amount of snaps for a guy that's playing that position, in my opinion. That's a decent amount of snaps. If you can take 100 snaps off of Jordan Botelho in that regard, and kind of get him down to 500. So, for example, JT Tuamaloa, I'm not getting that right. Last year in 14 games, played 504 snaps last season. If you can get your ends down to around that range, then I'm going to feel a lot better about where they are in from a rotation standpoint. So, 13 snaps. Zach Harrison last year, Ryan, played 483 snaps. Jack Sawyer played 329 snaps last year, right? So that's my point is if you can get into a situation, Ryan, where you can take 50, 60, 70, 80 snaps off of Jordan Botelho over the course of a year, that's less than 10 a game.
Yeah.
And Baptiste at 251. If the rotation can look more like that, where you take minimum 50 to 80 snaps off of Botelho relative to where Foskey was, now all of a sudden in the fourth quarter against Ohio State, your Viper's not working on snap 50. He's working on snap 35, whereas that offensive lineman's working on snap 70. All of a sudden, that burst becomes a little bit harder to handle. That speed becomes a little bit harder to handle. And that's where I want to be. And especially against the Tennessee States and the Central Michigans and the Pitts and teams like that, you definitely want to see a more of a rotation. So maybe then he can up his reps a little bit when you need to against Ohio State or a USC. So that's what I'm excited about is the battle's there. He's got to prove himself. Botelho's got to prove he can be that guy. I think he can be, but he's got to prove it. But the battle's really with Burnham and Tuihalamaka saying, hey, you better play us too.
Sure.
We need to play too because we can make plays. And you get in a situation where if you're out Washington, I don't care who's a Viper. I don't really care because they can all make plays. That's really the dream scenario. Now, will they get there? That's what this spring is going to determine, right? And it's part coaching and it's part player. The player's got to put in the work, but the coach has to make sure that he develops them and gives them the attention and the coaching that they need. If they do, Ryan, this is going to be a loaded position group next year.
I was going to say this, Brian, is that for me, the Viper position is the litmus test for Al Washington in 2023 because you can't question the talent there. You can't question the talent. Now, there's not a lot of proven production, right? We talked about Jordan Botelho having production in the amount of snaps that he has had in his career, but there's not proven production as in that's the guy. It's talent, it's upside. And if Al Washington can get the best out of that group in 2023, that makes me feel a lot better about how I currently feel about the trajectory of this defensive line group for Notre Dame. But if he doesn't get a lot out of that group, that strength is the concern for development up front. Because I say it again, man. I'll say it again. There's no excuse for not getting a lot of production out of Jordan Botelho, Joshua Burnham, and Junior Talamaka. There's no excuse for it. Zero.
None. The only one you can get is if they just all get injured. That's it.
Sure.
That's it. So I'm very curious to see that battle. The position on the D line to me, Ryan, that is going to be probably the least sexy to talk about, but arguably as important as anything that happens on defense is right now we expect Riley Mills and Howard Cross to be the starters up the middle. Behind it, much bigger question mark. And that's what I'm curious to see is who steps up. Does Gabriel Rubio take his game to another level? Does Jason Onye break out this spring? Does Donovan Heinisch come out of nowhere and surprise some people? Who are going to be those guys? Is Devin Houston ready to play? Is Tyson Ford move inside? Can he have a big spring? Can he kind of, take his work ethic and his mindset and his demeanor to another level? Tyson's a bit of a mild-mannered kid, quiet kid, good young man. I like Tyson a lot. He's got to learn, like a lot of guys that have his just where he's just so much better than everybody that he played against in high school. Yeah. It's like I've said about Deion Colsey. Like, does he really understand what he's capable of when he's pushed and really has to take his game to another level? Can he get there? If he does, he's got a chance to be a really good football player. And some guys like him have that struggle in year one. If it starts to figure it out, then you're good. Now, there's two ways to look at it as a coach. One is to say, hey, man, if you don't get going, then we're just going to find somebody else. The other way is to say, hey, this kid's really talented, and I'm going to figure out a way to get this kid going. Sure. And if I got to put my foot up as to get him going, then that's what I'm going to do. That's called coaching. That's what that's called, Ryan. It's called coaching. And you expect your coaches to do coaching, right? That's what they're paid for. And so, that's my frustration. But there's a lot of guys, and I know I'm leaving guys off. Devin Houston,
Aiden
Keanna, another guy. I'll be honest. I'll just say it now. I've been told that Al Washington doesn't really care much for him as a player, and so there's a lot more I could say. Not going to say it right now, but are they just going to let that kid fall by the wayside, or are they going to coach him up and try to see what they got from him? Right. I don't know the answer to that question right now. We'll find out starting here very soon in the spring. But he's another guy, 300-plus pounds, decent athlete for his size, nothing special, but a big physical kid that in limited reps has shown he's got a chance to do something, as a Chris Smith type of role player. And you need that. I mean, one of the issues Notre Dame has had in recent years is beef when they need it. Now, I think beef all the time is overrated if you're running your defense the correct way. But right now I have two issues. Number one, they are playing a style of defense that requires more beef, but they don't have it, which I think is dumb. Number two, some of the beef they had there just wasn't a lot of depth there. Gabriel Rubio last year is a borderline 300-pounder, but he's a redshirt freshman who was kind of coming along. He's not quite there yet. He'll now be a junior redshirt sophomore. You expect Gabriel to take another jump in. I thought, Ryan, he got better and better and better as the year went on. Like, I remember watching against BYU, and there's a couple times where the BYU line just came off and just pancaked him.
Smacked him,
just flattened him. Yeah. That wasn't happening to him by the end of the year. Because he, again, big, strong kid that was just better than everybody around him. Right. And then, Gabriel never went against a high school offensive lineman that could pancake him, could earhole him like BYU's guys did. It's a learning lesson. And then he gets better about it, does a better job with his technique, doesn't stop his feet as much. And next thing you know, that's not happening to him. That's what happens when you get experience. Right. But he's got a chance to be better. Aiden Keanna's got a chance to be better. But that's all the beef you really have.
Yeah.
Right. The rest of your guys, we're excited about the fact that Devin Houston showed up at 285. 285. That's what we're excited about, right? So there's not a lot of beef there. So you can't afford to just dismiss a guy like Aiden Keanna. Got to get him ready to play. The rest of your guys are 285 or smaller. That's just the reality of it. So number one, you've got to turn them loose a little bit more and not have them two gap and eat up blocks for your linebackers as much as they did last year. That's scheme over personnel. That's what that was. I mean, am I wrong? They chose scheme over personnel, which is why who's the one guy that was surprisingly good last year? Chris Smith. Why? Because he's the one guy that had the body type to do what they were asking him to do.
Yep.
Right? So he's gone. You've got to hope that Rubio and Keanna can do that. But when Onye's in the game, when when Riley's in the game, Riley Mills right now is your second biggest interior defensive lineman. That's not
at like 291 or 292
like
or something.
293, 294
Yeah.
or something like
Yeah.
that. Right.
Yeah.
So you've got to play to that more. You have a 275-pound nose tackle. You've got a guy starting at 3 technique that was a big end for you last year. Turn him loose. Yep. That's number one. Turn him loose. And then take advantage of the big boys you do have. And that's what I want to see. And who steps up? I mean, because, again, this is partly on the players, too. Does Tyson Ford develop the work ethic he needs to? Does Donovan Heinisch really put in – now, what I say about Donovan is it's not – he's going to work his butt off. But has he put in the work to where he's now physically ready to come out and play this year, right? The motor's there, the athleticism there. Is he going to be big enough to hold up, based on what he's done this offseason? Is Jason Onye going to be able to take his game? He's a very intriguing player to me, Ryan. 285, really long, athletic, still raw. Does the light go on for him this spring? Those are all really important questions for me. And the more of those guys that check those boxes in the affirmative is going to go a long way towards this defense being good. Because if the two end positions are as good as we think they can be, but the interior is a problem, the defense is going to be a problem.
No doubt.
It's defense and offense. If you're not good up the middle, you're not going to be good. You're just not in the big games. And so I'm very curious to see what young players come out and push their way into the rotation this year, Ryan. So it's not specifically a battle for a starting job as much as you're battling for that number 3 job, for that number 4 job, for that job where they say, boy, we just got to find a way to get this guy on the field. Sure. And it's I don't know if I'd say it's going to be exciting because it's interior defensive line, but it's important. Very, very important that these
I would also argue, Brian, that, Howard Cross had a nice start to the year last year. I thought he played really well. Through the first few games, I would argue he was the best interior defensive lineman. But then he wore down a little bit. Well, why does a 265-pound defensive tackle wear down? Because you're asking him to 2-gap a ton, working off multiple blockers. Attack, man. Attack. Because that's one thing you have on the interiors. You have some good athletes, man. You have some guys that can move. There's no doubt about that. You need to be able to kind of accentuate their strengths. And at the end of the day, man, like Gabriel Rubio has a lot of talents, right? And we've seen the growth that he had. Jason Onye, everybody knew coming out of high school that that ceiling is pretty nice. There's substantial work that can be done there. Devin Houston's a guy that we both liked. There is talent in that room, but it's about utilizing them the right way. And it's also about who's going to step up, who's going to be the guy to challenge the Riley Mills, to challenge the Howard Cross and say, I don't care if you guys are seniors or fifth-year guys. We're going to come and we're going to challenge you for reps this offseason. Because at the end of the day, if some guys can challenge them, that benefits Howard Cross so much. That benefits Riley Mills a ton. Keeping those guys fresh, because working in the interior, man, is not for the faint of heart. That is a tough gig to be able to anchor against double teams, to be able to work through chaos, to be able to counteract the physicality against some really good offensive lines. So Notre Dame needs to find that depth because just generally speaking, interior defensive lines get worn down sometimes, man. That is not an easy position to hold up at. It's just not.
Well, and that's the thing about Howard Cross too, Ryan, is he's got to play less. And I don't mean that from a talent standpoint. I think Howard Cross, when he's on the field and fresh, is a really disruptive football player and has been for 3 years now as part of the rotation. The problem, however, is they play him too much. And look, the proof is in the pudding, man. Just look at the numbers. The first 6 games of the year that he played, he had 11 run stops and 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 11, 5, 6, 8, 9, 10 pressures, pass pressures, right? When you look at him on I got you right. When you look at him on the other side, on the last 6 games of the year, because again, he starts to get that wear and tear, he has 1 more pass rush. So he has 11 pressures, but only has 2 run stops. So his game wore down. And they were using him less and less and less in run situations and more in pass rush situations. And so to me, when you look at a kid like Howard Cross, he needs to play a fewer snaps this year. He had 477 snaps last year. If you can get him down to averaging about 25 to 30 a game at the most, you're going to have a guy that's going to be a really good football player. Because, again, he got hurt. He wore down. He didn't play against BYU. But being the season, he played 38 games against Ohio, 38 snaps against Ohio State, 49 against Marshall, 57 against Cal, 39 against North Carolina, 35 against Stanford, 34 against UNLV, 31 against Syracuse, 37 against Clemson, 50 against Navy, 47 against South Carolina, 38 against USC, 22 against Boston College, which was, by the way, was one of his best games of the year, by the way. So he was really good early in the year, to Ryan's point, because he was fresh, he was quick, he was agile. The more he plays, the more he wears down. That's just part of life with a guy his size. If they can get him to being more of a, starter, fine, but a guy that's averaging 30 to 35 at the most a game, and that's even in the good games. And then when you're playing a team like Tennessee State, he should be like 20. I mean, let him go out there, blow up in the first half, and then let other guys play. And so, but here's the thing. You can't do that with Howard Cross if other guys don't step up. And I can say all I want about Al Washington and Al Golden. They need to not play Howard Cross a lot of snaps, and he's going to wear down, and he can't be the player he's capable of if he plays a bunch of snaps, and you can't have him play 470 snaps and all this. I could say this until I'm blue in the face. But as a coach, if you don't have guys that can play at a somewhat high enough level, then I can't afford to not play him fewer. I have to play him more. I think another thing, I think this is another part too, Ryan. One difference that should help Howard Cross this year, if Notre Dame handles his reps right, is the schedule is much more conducive to managing his workload early. Because last year, I mean, you were playing Ohio State in the opener. Marshall was a competitive game against a 9-10 win caliber team. Cal's a Pac-12 team. There's a borderline bowl team the year before. You get North Carolina the next game, who was the ACC Coastal Champs. You get BYU. I mean, you had a gauntlet out of the gate. This year, you've got Navy in the opener. Then you've got Tennessee State. NC State should be a battle. Then Central Michigan. You've got a 4-game stretch where there's plenty of opportunities to manage the workload of a guy like Howard Cross. Because the point I was making, Ryan, was he can't play 477 snaps again. You just can't. There's a point of diminishing returns with Howard Cross from a snap standpoint. And he played a ton of snaps in September. This year, he can't use him that way. You've got to minimize the snaps early and let him stay fresh. Because when he wears down, he's 270 pounds. But let's be honest, he shouldn't be 270 pounds. Right. He should be 265, 260. So that's going to be a big key. But the point I made, Ryan, and I want you to respond to this, is that's all fine and dandy. But the reason we're talking about this battle is not who should beat out Howard Cross. I'm not saying that. It's who can battle to take that next step to say, I can take some of the reps off of him. Because when you take him out, I can come in and be a player. I can come in and play my role and make plays. Because I can say all that I want that he shouldn't play that much. But as a coach, if there's a big drop off between Howard Cross and my next guy, I've got no choice. I have to play him because we got to win. And that's why this spring is so important from a position battle standpoint, is who are the young guys that step up and say, I got you, coach. I can take those reps away and I can play at a high level. Is it Gabriel? Is it Aiden? Is it Onye? Is it Devin Houston? Is it Donovan Heinisch? Is it Tyson Ford? Or hopefully, is it a bunch of those guys?
Right.
That's going to be key. So that to me is arguably the most important position battle that's happening this whole spring on defense. It's the battle for the number 2 and number 3 spots on the 2 interior positions of the defensive line.
I think it's really funny because I think when people hear you say a guy needs to play less, I think it's a huge negative. And it's not how it is, man. The guy has proven that in a smaller sample size, he could be a more impactful football player, right? Like, he could be a good player with, an X amount of snaps, a higher number. But if he plays 25, 30 reps a game, maybe he has a couple more tackles for loss. Maybe he has another couple pressures. Like, he has more impactful plays to his arsenal. And also, Brian, I always go back to Georgia, and I know it's probably annoying to some people, but Jordan Davis went in the first round last year, and I don't think he ever had a season where he was over 25% of the snaps in a season. There's a reason for that. And the best teams have that type of depth. The best teams have guys where it's like The first wave's out. Oh, thank God. As an offensive line, I can kind of breathe a sigh of relief. And then here comes Bear Alexander and Warren Brinson. Like, that's how the best teams are formulated. So for Notre Dame to be a championship caliber roster, a championship caliber defense, I think you need that type of arsenal inside. It doesn't have to look exactly the same as what Georgia does, but it has to be impactful in waves, is my point.
Ryan, Jalen Carter and Howard Cross played the same number of games last year. They both played 12.
Yeah.
Howard Cross played 85 more snaps than Jalen Carter, who's over 300 pounds.
Jalen Carter, who's arguably the most talented player of the 2023 NFL draft.
Correct.
Yeah.
He played more snaps than Nazir Stackhouse. He played way more snaps than Bear Alexander. He played more snaps than Michael Williams. You get my point?
Yeah.
Like, this is what I'm talking about. It's not that Howard can't play. No interior defensive lineman no Georgia defensive lineman last year played more snaps than Howard Cross, and they played 2 more games. And Howard missed a game for Notre Dame. And only one guy in their interior last year played more than 400 snaps. Just one, Nazir Stackhouse. And so that's my point. That's what's got to change. That's where Notre Dame has to figure out a way to say, we've got to get a deeper rotation. We got to force a deeper rotation. And you do that by recruiting better players, but by coaching those guys up and giving those guys the opportunity. And then those guys have to seize it. So, to me, Ryan, that's going to be a big part of this. Is Notre Dame had 2 interior guys play over 400 snaps last year. And Jason Adamiola played 418 snaps last year. He only played 11 games.
Yeah.
And then he got knocked out of another. So you've got to get the snaps down on the interior. You've got to get the snaps down for Howard Cross. So that's my point. I wanted to get some context to that because you made a great point. Some people are going to hear me say like, "Oh, Driscoll doesn't think that Howard Cross is any good, shouldn't play."
He thinks Cross stinks. Thinks Howard Cross stinks. Yeah,
I'm not saying that at all. I think Howard Cross has been a much better player than I thought he was going to be. But the reality is they got to get a snap. For a perfect example, in 2022 and 2020. Now again, they played fewer games, but Notre Dame played a deep rotation that year. Neither Kurt Hinish or Myron Tungavaloa-Amosa got up to 380 snaps. Neither of them got to that because you had those 2 guys. You had Jason Adamiola. You had Howard Cross. You had Jacob Lacey. You had Riley Mills. You had 6 guys that got at least 140 snaps on the interior of the defensive line that year. That's where it's got to be. And then that made Kurt Hinish was a lot better late in the season and late in games because he didn't have the wear and tear that he had at other times in his career. And that's my point. That's where I'm coming from is you've got to keep the snaps down to allow those guys to be fresh and to be able to make it through an entire season. And you want an example in Kurt Hinish's last 3 years, like his best seasons were years where he played under 400 snaps. His most productive years was when he played under 400 snaps.
Yep.
And think about this. Kurt Hinish was a 300-pounder at Notre Dame. He never played in his career more than 433 snaps in a season. He did that in 2019. He did that in 13 games. In his last 4 years, he played 388, 372, 433, and 354 at 300 pounds. Yet Howard Cross played 477 snaps last year in 12 games. It's way too much.
Yep.
Way too much.
And in order for them to get that number down, players need to step up this offseason is the main point, right? Gabriel Rubio, Jason Onye, Devin Houston, Tyson Ford, if he moves inside, somebody needs to take that on us. And hopefully it's a couple of guys that say like, Howard, we got you, bro. Like you're going to stay fresh in the game late against USC this year. Like you're going to be that guy and be more impactful in the fourth quarter. That's what you need.
And hey, buddy, we're playing Tennessee State this weekend. Just letting you know, you're not going to play more than 20 snaps. Just letting you know. That's just, you've got to beat Central Michigan. We got Ohio State coming up next week. I'm just letting you know, buddy, this game sandwich in between NC State and Ohio State, sorry, partner, you're not going to play more than 15, 20 snaps. That's okay because you're going to play in 45 against Ohio State. That's my point. Right. Then you take those 2 games together and he averaged 60, or he had 60, 45 against Ohio State, or let's say 50, but only 15 against Central Michigan because you're going to play your younger guys and put that game away. And all of a sudden, in a 2-game stretch, he's played 65 snaps. That's 33 and a half snaps. That gets him right on pace for that 375 mark. That's the sweet spot for me. You take 100 snaps off his body last year, and all of a sudden now he can be twitchier and more productive over the course of the season. But you got to do that job as a coach. But as you said, Ryan, as we get ready to wrap this up in a couple other positions, it's also up to those guys to take advantage of this spring and say, hey, coach, you need to play me based on what? Look at what I'm doing every day. Look what I'm doing against Zeke Correll. Look what I'm doing against Billy Stroud. Look what I'm doing again in one-on-ones against these guys. I'm putting in the work. I'm making plays. I'm making plays against our offensive line. That says something, right?
Yep.
And they've got to earn that too. I mean, it's not always just we as fans make two mistakes. Number one is we put too much on the coaches. Everything is the coach's fault. Everything is the coach's fault. 6 guys are fundamentally sound. One dude isn't, and it's what's the freaking coach isn't coaching that guy up. Really? He's coaching these other 6 guys up, but that one guy he's not coaching up. Come on now. Maybe that kid's not putting in the work. The other one is to, and then the players get no burden. The other one is to put everything on the coaches. And this is the one that drives me nuts the most. All the linebackers are fundamentally unsound. It's their fault. It's their fault.
Right.
The veterans regress. The talented freshmen aren't ready to play, but it's their fault. It's not the coaches. It's their fault.
Makes sense.
Really?
Yeah.
Really? It's a middle ground. The coaches got to put in the work and develop the players, and then the players have to put in the work to become the best that they can be.
Yep.
It's simple as that. And right now, I don't think that they're getting enough of that on the coaching side. And if I'm wrong on that, and Al Washington, and I'm going to have an article coming up soon about this, how this is a big year for Al Washington, like big year. He, as much as any coach on the staff, is going to have a biggest role in Notre Dame reaching their potential as a team or falling short. And if the defensive line comes out there and balls this year, it's not just because they're talented. It's not. D-line is a position where you need talent and good coaching.
Yep.
He's got an opportunity to win Notre Dame fans over this year. Will he do it? I don't know. Hope he does, because from everything I've ever heard, he's a good dude.
Sure.
He's just didn't do a very good job coaching last year. Let's move on to the second level, Ryan. The position I want to focus on is Will. Will linebacker is such an intriguing position. And it's basically, it's Maris Luafau, it's kind of Prince Colley, it's Nolan Ziegler, it's Jalen Sneed, and then there's another guy that I would consider, strongly consider being part of this battle, and that is Jack Kaiser. And this position is so important, Ryan, and this battle is going to be so important. Number one, there better be a position battle. If not, then there's a huge problem.
Yeah.
And if Marcus Freeman doesn't force this, then that's on him, right? And then it's up to Al Golden to get it ready to go. And I'm tired of people blaming James Laurinaitis and now Max Bulla. Al Golden's the one making all the money to be the linebackers coach. So I'm not passing this off to a GA. He needs to do more, way more than what he's doing. And what y'all need to understand is I'm not just saying this because of what I saw in film. This is what I hear constantly from people around the program. He's got to step up and do a better job. Yeah. There needs to be a legitimate battle at will. And Maris Luafau is going to be in there. He should be. Maris, to me, is a guy that needs to be out of the starting lineup based on what he did last year. But I hope that he has a big spring where he becomes a more disciplined player, right? Because he's still long, he's still athletic, and he can still hit, right? It's just he doesn't know what he's doing. That's got to change. That's where Al Golden's got to really step up and say, dude, you're the DC. Nobody can get this kid more prepared to execute your defense than you. Nobody. Yep. Do your freaking job. This isn't the NFL where you're just a D coordinator. This is college football. You got to coach a position. So that's number one. And then after that, it's about getting those young guys ready, whether it's Nolan Ziegler or Jalen Sneed. From my understanding is I believe as of right now, Jalen's going to be playing sort of a Sam Rover type of thing in different looks. Maybe some Will. Nolan Ziegler's going to be in this conversation. I think they need to strongly look at moving Jack Kaiser to Will and be part of a rotation. Now, I don't know if Jack Kaiser can be, Ryan, a 60-snap a game guy against a power running team, but here's the reality of it. Looking at their schedule, who's that team?
Right.
Who's that team where you can expose Jack Kaiser as the Will from a size standpoint against the run? I don't know who that is. Most of the teams they play are pass-heavy teams. Ohio State is probably the closest you can get to it. And they tend to lean heavily on the pass at times. But you can easily sub somebody in if you get into a fourth quarter like against Ohio State last year and they're just pounding the football. You can put somebody else in there. But I think Jack Kaiser needs to be part of this conversation as well as Nolan Ziegler and Prince Colley and all those other guys, Ryan. And there's a lot of uncertainty about this. Prince has had some issues staying on the field. Who knows where his head is right now. Nolan Ziegler hasn't played a meaningful snap. He's the longest, twitchiest guy in the group, in my opinion. He's a guy that needs an opportunity. I don't think he's going to get it, though. I'm just telling you right now, I don't think he's going to get it. I don't know where they're going to go here, Ryan, but there needs to be a position battle. But from everything I hear, I just don't know if there's going to be one, to be honest with you. That's my concern. And I hope that I'm wrong about that.
If there isn't, that is just the most troubling thing in the world because, what coach can look at last year? I would hope, and again, I'm trying to be as nice as I can with this comment here. I hope that Maris Loifau can also look at the film from 2021 and be like, or 2022 and be like, man, I wasn't very good last year. Like, I hope he has that self-awareness in him, right? If I'm a coach, how can you watch what Maris did last year and be like, yep, that's up to par. That's up to the standard. It's not at Notre Dame. It's not at a good school in general. Like, you need a better production from that position and more consistent play from that position than what you got from Maris. And last year, Brian, you were in a situation where everyone made the call during the season from a fan perspective of get Prince Colley more reps, right? But outside of Prince Colley, there wasn't really another answer at will. I would argue this offseason, there's several other answers that it could be, right? It's not just one guy, make it or break it. And if he's not the guy, there's no push. Maris should have a lot of pressure on him from Nolan, from Prince Colley, if everything's working out in that regard. From other guys, whether it's Jalen Sneed moving inside, whether it's Jack Kaiser moving inside, whether it's one of the true freshmen that are playing now that are enrolled in the spring. There needs to be competition there. Yeah. Because at the end of the day, what really sets team apart and sets coaches apart is being able to self-evaluate and understand that isn't working. We got to fix it, man. We got to fix it. The will linebacker position was not good enough last year. It wasn't. And everybody knows that listens to this show, listens back to last offseason shows. I was a big fan of Maris Loifau. I love the upside he has. But at the end of the day, I still do. But at the end of the day, 2022 wasn't good enough. It needs to be better. Whether that is Maris taking that step up, which is also a more reasonable option if there's competition behind him that he's going to take a step forward, or it's a combination, or it's somebody else supplanting. I don't know what the recipe is, but at the end of the day, there has to be a new solution to the problem.
Yes.
Because it was a problem in 2020.
Either a better version of Marist. One thing we said last year is everybody was so quick. Well, bench Kaiser, bench JD, bench Marist. The whole point was, guys, this is much deeper than the players. This is when all the linebackers are having similar issues. That's not a player problem. That's a preparation problem. That's a coaching problem. They're not being prepared to execute at a high enough level. And Jack got better as the year went on. JD got better. Marist went through a better stretch and then went off. And part of that is because then against USC, Marist is ascending, and then against Navy, it's a completely different animal. And he just mentally couldn't adjust quick enough. And then USC, they throw a whole new defense out at USC that they hadn't played in a while, and Marist can't execute it. Like, look, he for whatever reason, he hasn't been able to do that. Now, it's up to him, like you said, to say, hey, I know I can be better than this. And you hope that he has enough self-realization. But it's a coaching issue as well. And it's got to be both. And I think you hit that nicely. But here's my issue with it. Yeah. Of all the guys on the Notre Dame football team last year, it to me is a bad sign when Maris Loifau leads your team in snaps over the course of a season.
Out of all positions, or are you talking about
all positions? Huh. Now, part of that is because JD missed a game and missed parts of others because of the stuff. But he's the only guy that had a shot to be close to him. Number 2 was Benjamin Morrison. And then, so I just look at that and say there's no reason for that. There's no reason for him to be your team leader in snaps. And Prince Colley was barely over 100. Now, I don't know if Prince Colley's the player some people think he is. I don't know if he is that or not. We haven't seen it. But you knew what you had in Maris. And here's my whole point. If you have a depth chart, a roster that has Maris Loifau, Prince Colley, Jalen Sneed, Nolan Ziegler, Drake Bowen, Jaden Ausberry, J.D. Bertrand, and Jack Kaiser, and you can't get good play.
And Preston Zinter.
Preston Zinter. Yes,
yeah.
Exactly. Preston Zinter. If you can't get good play and production from that group of 9 dudes, at what point in time are we all willing to say, maybe this isn't a player problem, right? So that's what I'm really looking for this spring. I'm hoping that this is the last time we have this conversation. That's what I'm hoping for. I'm hoping what we see in spring ball is, okay, that we're ready to go. But I talked to different sources, and I haven't heard anything different than what we heard last year. That's my concern, is I'm hearing the same stuff now that I heard last year. And that's a problem. But the excuse, the whole experience excuse is just, it's gone, right? Jalen and Nolan aren't freshmen anymore. I had a guy say, well, do good teams really have freshmen play much? I'm like, yeah, the Dumas Johnson kid at Georgia played a decent amount of snaps in 2021, and him and the Munden kid were the 2 starters this year for Georgia's national championship team as true sophomores. There's 2 starting inside linebackers at Georgia this past year were true sophomores. So don't tell me, well, the good teams. No. They get there weren't good veteran players there. Are you telling me that? No, these guys were just better, and they were given the opportunity to go out there and be better. And you know what, Ryan? When you break down film early in the year, these 2 kids made a lot of mistakes.
Sure.
But they kept saying, hey, these are talented kids. Let's work with them. Let's develop them. And they got better and better and better and better and better as they played. So I'm not buying the excuse anymore. I'm done with it. When you have that group of 9 players that I just listed, if you can't get big-time production from your linebacker position, it's not a player problem anymore.
Yeah.
It's just not.
And it also becomes a situation where there's no excuses. I mean, because the excuses run out because there's talent in the room. But also, Brian, when you have so much depth, there's answers. You have answers, right? And if you can't make one of those players be an answer to one of your problems, again, whose fault is that? Whose fault is that? I said this with Al Washington at the Viper position, right? If you can't get production out of that group at Viper, there's an issue. Well, the same thing goes with Al Golden here. If you can't get production out of the linebacker unit better than what it was last year, there's probably an issue there, right? And we can throw out the excuse, first year, coming back to college, blah, 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 blah. We're past that now, though. We're past that. It's year 2 in a system. A lot of those linebackers that you mentioned are now in year 2 of a system. Even the freshmen from last year have to figure something else out, man. Have to figure something else out. Because if you go through another year where it's just like linebacker is not a good strength for Notre Dame, or it's even worse, and it's a weakness for Notre Dame like it was a few games last year, then that's a detriment to your team, obviously, but it's also a very big indication that something needs to change. Something needs to change, or else you're just hitting your head against the wall.
And I hope we do. Yes. I hope we see that this spring. I do. There's another position battle too, Ryan, at safety, and I think this is more. There isn't a position, and I don't want to spend a ton of time on it by itself, but with Xavier Watts, Ramon Henderson, and DJ Brown, look, DJ is going to be given an opportunity to start because he's experienced. The staff trusts him. The reality is he's just not a super athletic guy. And we've seen him when he has to play he's one of those guys where if you can get him in a niche, in a role, he's helpful. You can use him. Yeah.
Solid
the
player.
More you have to play him, the more there's a chance you got to put him in positions he's not going to thrive.
Yep.
So to me, there's a position battle at safety. The question, however, is will Xavier Watts and Ramon Henderson do what it takes to say we are the starters? And then now DJ can be a rotation guy. Yeah. That's position battle number 1 at safety. And then number 2 is what's the depth behind those 3? Or is there depth behind those 3? And if you have to move Thomas Harper to safety to protect yourself, you've now hurt yourself at nickel. And I would argue that the nickel position is every bit as important as the starting safety positions when you look at the schedule that Notre Dame plays this year. NC State, Ohio State, Clemson, USC, Duke, the 5 best teams, in my opinion, you're going to play off the top of my head this year. 6 teams, you throw Louisville in there. I think they're all going to be better than Pitt. We'll see about Pitt. I'm not sure about them. But you throw Pitt in there. 6 of the 7 teams that you're going to play this year, the 6 of the 7 best teams you're going to play this year are all teams where your nickel's going to have to basically be a starter in that game.
A lot of spread, yeah.
It just is. And so to me, you cannot move him to safety to protect yourself there in depth. You got to figure something else out. But there's going to be that battle. And that's what's going to lead us to our last conversation. What to do with Clarence Lewis. Because you made a point to me, Ryan, and I'll let you kind of run with it. I'm going to set you up for this. You made a point to me as we were prepping for the show. Clarence Lewis could be a part of 3 different position battles this spring. You got to figure out where he can help you the most and then move him there, because the position battle at corner is as the number 3 guy, starting nickel, potentially as an impact at safety. You got to figure something out and give him a chance to be a guy that can help you a lot more, in my opinion.
And I'm really interested to see how the defensive backfield just fills out in general, Brian, because I almost think it's like a situation of where can Clarence Lewis have those impacts, but also that does come into a conversation of, but where's the need also, right? Like you need to make sure that your bases are covered before you throw for the ceiling with a guy like a Clarence Lewis, because the great thing about Clarence is that he is dependable. He might not have the highest ceiling in the world, but like if he ends up at corner, nickel, or safety, I feel solid about what Clarence can bring to the field. Like I feel like he can bring you positive production from 3 different spots potentially. When you're looking at him at corner, though, it's like awesome to have a 3rd corner. That's great. But also you have Christian Gray, who's a true freshman. We'll see what happens there. You have Ryan Barnes. You have Chance Tucker. Like there's some guys there, man. Jaden Mickey. Like there's a lot of talented corners there. So my first thought is, well, he'd probably be more impactful inside somewhere, whether that is as a nickel, whether that is a safety, or there's a little bit of interchangeableness between safety and nickel. We could also get to that conversation. But right now, I think if you ask me, where is the glaring weakness in the secondary? We've talked about the strength of corner. Talk about it nickel now with Thomas Harper coming in, and then maybe some Jane Mickey at times or Clarence Lewis at times. Like that's a pretty strong position overall. Safety has talent, but you don't have a ton of proven track record on the back end right now. And you don't have a ton of depth, at least proven depth at this point.
And your talent is thin because you don't have to go very long in the conversation to get down to freshman. And you won't have a Don Schuler this spring.
Exactly. And you'll have a Xavier Watts who you expect to be a breakout, but it's still a question. How much does he break out? Is he a starter full time? Is he a substantial playmaker? I think he can be for sure, but there's still a question until it happens. Ramon Henderson has been like a niche player, has shown positive moments during his career over the last 2 years, but can he be the de facto starter? Can he be a guy that can play a large level of snaps? Don't know the answer to that. How much does DJ Brown play? Is he a guy that is forced to be a starter because other guys don't step up? Is he a guy that is just a key rotational piece to a good safety group? Regardless, though, you need to find more answers. And I think Clarence Lewis potentially could be that answer at safety, because I think that's where the biggest glaring weakness is. And I think that also there is some interchangeableness of saying Clarence can kind of be our inside safety to nickel type of guy, or maybe he can back up a couple positions, but you can really utilize his versatility, I think, inside a lot more than you can utilize outside.
For me, Ryan, it comes down to this. Safety is the position that answers 2 big questions for me with Clarence. Where can he battle for a starting job? And where's his future in the NFL, if he's going to have one? And the answer to both of those is safety. Like Ramon Henderson's got to prove himself that he can be an every down guy. So does Xavier Watts. I think they can be. But I think Clarence is good enough to where if given the whole spring, now here's the thing, if you wait till after the spring to move him, he's not going to be that guy, barring injury. But if you move him now and let him compete, he could at least be sort of a co-starter there. But if he's going to be a co-starter there, then you could do the whole safety nickel thing where he can really help you a ton at both and play a ton of snaps at both. But I think your point is correct, is the combination of can he help you the most now, with also looking out for the young man, what position gives him the best chance to play professional football. Both of those answers are inside. They're not outside a corner. And so part of it is Chance Tucker's got to step up this spring and really prove himself ready to play. Because he's the guy that could battle for that number 2 boundary job to help out there. You've got Jaden Mickey out there at outside to where Cam Hart plays. You've got Christian Gray coming in. Hopefully Ryan Barnes can kind of put it all together this spring. The point is there's enough talent there at cornerback.
Yep.
You've got to move Clarence inside, and you've got to do it now. You can't wait till halfway through spring or end of spring or fall camp. If he's going to truly be given a chance to compete for a starting role there, you've got to let him get there this spring. And here's the thing. If you move Clarence now and he doesn't win a starting safety job, it says a lot about the spring that Xavier Watts and Ramon Henderson are going to have.
And also, Brian, to your point of the talent that's in the cornerback room outside of Clarence, also, what position coach has the best track record of developing his position? I trust Coach Mickens to get Chance Tucker or Ryan Barnes or
100%.
Jaden or somebody else to be ready to play football, man. Yeah.
Mike Mickens coached up a cornerback room of Nick McLeod and Clarence Lewis to be a playoff team.
Yeah.
Right? Like, the dude can freaking coach.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, number one, Notre Dame, pay the freaking dude. Number two, there's a level of, I trust Mickens to get those guys ready to play by the time we play NC State.
Exactly.
That's the key. So, let Clarence go there and learn at safety and nickel and provide you depth there. Because if he doesn't start, he can play both positions. If he does start, then now all of a sudden maybe somebody else can double up there. Because between Xavier Watts and Clarence Lewis, you have two safeties that I think could really help you in the nickel, in my view. And Ben Minich is another one I'd be curious to see kind of as a nickel, playing that position. He can flip his hips and run, and so you have guys there. Plus, you have some corners that can play it. So you have plenty of guys there. You need to get better. You need to get more impactful at safety. And I think Clarence, as a cover guy at safety, could be a much better player there than I think what they have in that number 3, number 4 spot, in my view. So that's the other one is Clarence Lewis needs to be in a battle somewhere. The place where he's going to have the least chance to battle is corner. Now, he may be the starter all spring if Cam Hart's out, but you and I both know, the staff knows, Clarence knows, everybody knows, once Cam Hart comes back, at best, you're the number 3 corner.
Yeah.
And if Jaden Mickey steps up and has a big spring, or Chance Tucker steps up and has a big spring, or if Christian Gray's as good as we think he is, then all of a sudden Clarence is sitting there at number 4, maybe number 5, where he can help you somewhere else. And now he's in that no man's land. He's been passed up a corner. He missed a whole spring opportunity to push it, to learn at safety. So now he's way behind the 8 ball there. And now you've hurt yourself, in my opinion. Move him now.
And you wasted a year of Clarence's eligibility too by fooling around with it. Like if that decision is going to be made, to your point, make it now, man.
He's a safety nickel right now. Nickel, safety and nickel right now. Day one, that's the room he's in. He's in the room with O'Leary. Let him develop and let him push. And if he wins a starting job, you're set. If he doesn't win a starting job, that means Ramon and Xavier really stepped up and you're set.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where I'm at. So that's the last part of that one, Ryan. So that's going to do it for the position battle aspects. We're going to have a mailbag next. But before we do, folks, please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast. And also, if you haven't done so, sign up for the message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. It's where we can kind of continue these conversations. When we get intel, we'll put that intel up there. Ryan's got a ton of recruiting stuff on the message board right now. We're going to get even more. We're going to have, St. Patrick's Day is coming up here in a couple days, Ryan. You know what happens for Notre Dame on St. Patrick's Day every year. The last few years, it's the pot of gold. So it's always fun to see kind of how that goes and where those go out to. So looking forward to that. So you want to have all that stuff on the message board, and you get that at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Let's move on to the mailbag, Mr. Roberts. And we have a couple super chats here that we'll get to first. Number one, we did have a super sticker from Paul Church. Paul, thank you very, very much. We appreciate that. And we have one from Kay Grant, my man Kay Grant with the super chat. Thank you, sir. As Coach Marcus Freeman enters year 2, what's 1 to 2 observations you're looking for from him as a coach who has a year of experience under his belt?
I think more involvement with the coordinators is one for me, Brian. Like I do think that there is some validity to Marcus Freeman as a first-year head coach. Let's trust what's around me and let's observe, right? Like that's kind of a common thing that I think happens for first-year head coaches. Year 2, Kay Grant, I expect him to have more of an onus on Nope, we did that last year. Nope, we're not doing that again, right? This is what needs to be done in these rooms. So I think just more involvement from not even a game planning, well, from a game planning perspective for sure, but just like how the rooms are run a little bit more, right? Like what the expectations is for coordinators. Like I think that's a major one for me, Brian, is that like you want him to be more involved with the everyday operation of both offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator and how they're formatting practices, how they're game planning things, and just bouncing ideas off of each other. Like I think that is just having his identity in both sides of the ball, I think is something that could be impactful in year two.
Yeah, I mean, it's to me, it's creating a greater sense of accountability at the coaching level is the one for me. And there's a right way and a wrong way to do that. The wrong way is just constantly being on them and just being like just in their face and just constantly negative and picking them apart and embarrassing them in front of players and all that. I don't want to see that. But it's up to Coach Freeman to say, hey, look, at the end of the day, you're the head coach. You were a former defensive coordinator. If the linebacker play doesn't improve, where's the accountability? Like, where are you stepping in saying, hey, this is what we need to do? You've coached all these kids. You saw the regression they all showed last year at chunks of the season. I hope that he sees that. I do. I hope that he sees that the production took a dip last year and create some accountability, right? Hey, look, Coach Washington, we've got these guys that are really good. Where are you holding them accountable for doing the job that they need to do? That's the biggest question mark for me for right now for Marcus Freeman is I know he's got the chops to be a head coach in a lot of areas. The one that I have the most questions for is this right here. Does he have to be a great head coach, you need to be kind of a small party needs to be a bit of you've got to be willing to be a prick at times. And if, especially with people that you are friends with and have known for a long time, you got to be able to say, hey, look, man, you're my boy. And that's why I brought you here because I believe in you. But right now, you're making me look stupid. You're not doing a job. Like, if you can't get these kids ready to go, man, I'm sorry. I'm going to find somebody who can. Because, and I'm being serious, this isn't an empty threat because you look at what you got in that room. It's not good enough.
Right.
And there needs to be that air of accountability because, yes, you need to be a coach's coach. Let those coaches coach, but it's doing so within the framework of what you're demanding. And I'll say this, talking to several people, whether it's parents and parents of current players, parents of former players, talking to former players from last season, the reality is that there was not the same level of I've got your back as a coach in the front seven as they had the year before when it was Elston and Freeman.
Right.
There was not the same feeling of this coach cares about me. This coach has my back with Golden and Washington as you had with Freeman and Elston and Lee and Elston. That's the reality. That whether you think that's right or not, that's what the players feel, and that's really the only opinion that matters in this instance. And that's what Marcus Freeman has said he wants as a coach. And he needs to start demanding that from his assistants. And a lot of them that he hired are that way. Mike Mickens is that way. I think Chris O'Leary is becoming that way. He's still a young coach. I mean, guy's not even 30 yet. You know what I mean? Coach Stuckey, I believe, is that way. Coach Parker is that way. Coach Heastand was that way. But there's not enough. I don't know about Coach McCullough. I don't know one way or the other. I haven't heard anything from there, so I'm leaving him out purposely because I don't have an answer one way or the other. But the way his room produced last year, you kind of feel like he's doing something right. Okay. Yeah. But there's a lot of reasons why the defensive line and linebackers didn't produce last year the way they needed to.
Yep.
And it's not all coaching. Some of it's the players, older players weren't bought in as much. But that excuse only goes so far. At some point in time, you got to say, well, why are we having this problem now when I didn't have this problem before? Right. And you've got to step up and say, I had your back in this situation, this way, but now it's up to you to get it done. Yep. And I don't care if you don't like this kid or not, go freaking coach him. And that's your job. Look, I can promise you, Ryan, I coach kids that I didn't like and they didn't like me. But my job was to get them ready to go play at a high level on Saturday. And as long as they did that, I don't care if they liked me or not. I don't, right? You know how much I care about whether or not people like me or not, right? All right. Wasn't any different from my players. Now, was it easier when the players liked and respected me? Sure. Was it easier when I liked and respected them? Sure. At the end of the day, that didn't matter. What mattered is what happens on Saturday. And right now, the production of those two positions is not good enough. And it's up to him to say, hey, something's got to change. And the other thing to me is I'm going to feel better if I start hearing more about him fighting more battles off the field with the administration.
Sure.
Because right now, I feel like I'm not going to say it. He needs to fight harder because he's never going to have more leverage other than winning a championship. He'll never have more leverage than he has right now. The fans love him. The donors love him. The players still love and respect him. That's going to end eventually. And that's not the time to step up and say, I'm going to fight for what I want and need right now. And he needs to be willing to be vocal about it. Because like they're not going to fire him. You know what I mean? Because all heck would break loose. And if you believe in something, then go fight for it. And that's a bit of a concern. That's just me kind of reading the tea leaves a little bit, Ryan, but just some things I'm hearing from some different people outside the program about things that just has me a little bit concerned about that. So that's the other thing is the accountability, and then use the leverage you have. I don't know if he realizes the leverage he has right now, but he has a lot of leverage right now if he's willing to use it. And if they go out this year and have success on the field, like 10, 11 wins, then he'll have even more. And he needs to use it now and use it hard now. Super chat from Charlie Weiss's last belt loop. He says, Coach, I have to ask, so if someone is clearly better, but Al Washington doesn't care for the guy, is he going to play the guys he cares for over the real talent? I can't answer that because last year, Aiden Canana got hurt early in the spring. So by the time he came back, I mean, he was kind of buried. So I don't know if it's a situation where the kid should have played and he didn't play him. I don't have any evidence to answer that question. I think it's more about, is he willing to take a kid who maybe is raw but young and put in the work to build him up to where he can challenge other people? That's more of my question. And so, I think as soon as I said it, I was like, I know this is going to come back to bite me because someone's going to take that and run with it to a direction that I didn't intend it to go. Aiden was not in a position to play last year a whole lot because he was hurt most of the year.
Yeah.
With other guys, it wasn't so much that does he like a guy? I don't know what his feelings are at Alexander Ehrensberger. I have no clue. We mentioned that about one guy. And now that one guy is being asked by someone about an overall bigger picture thing, and that's not what I'm talking about. Sure. Right? So it's his job to say, no matter what your feelings are for a player, you coach that kid to the best of your ability. And, and until that kid's no longer on your roster. And that's your job.
We'll start to get more evidence of it this spring, obviously, right? Like if you hear great things about some younger guys and working in more with the first team and doing all that type of stuff, like we'll start getting more evidence if that's true or not. But I mean, ultimately, who knows? We don't have enough data points on Coach Washington or most of the staff, to be honest, to know if that is true or that is not true. Like we know it with Mike Mickens, for instance, right? Like Mike Mickens got Benjamin Morrison ready to play early in the season, and then he gave him a legit shot as a true freshman. We know that one, right? But there's some other rooms where we have no idea what that case will be. So we'll see.
Yep. Next question is from Ron Bosgood. Can you take these questions now, Ryan?
Yeah. So mailbag from Rob says, guys, what talks do you think Marcus Freeman is having with Al Golden about defense? I'm sure he is not happy with the direction, especially with the linebackers. Thank you for what y'all do. Best intel on the boards.
Sadly, Ryan, I don't know that we can assume that.
Yeah.
I mean, what evidence do we have that he views it as a problem? I'm not saying that I think he thinks it was great. I'm saying we have no evidence that he thinks it was bad. None. Or that he thinks it was good. We don't know either way. Because Coach Freeman's going to always say the right thing publicly. Always.
Yes.
And he's always going to have his coaches' backs publicly. And he should. He's always going to have his players' backs publicly. And he should. I don't care what he says publicly. There's a time and a place to hold people accountable in a public forum, but it's not often. And it's not as much with college kids as it is professionals. There comes a point in time, though, where it's what you do behind the scenes that matters. And we don't have evidence one way or the other about how he feels about the play of the linebackers. We don't have a clue what he thinks. And so we'll find out as we get through the spring and we see if anything's changed or not. If nothing's changed, then we're going to know that he doesn't think it was a problem. And the stuff he says about how good JD is and what Jack brings to the table and what Maris can do is that's actually how he feels. It's not just lip service and saying the right thing. It's how he actually feels. Because if nothing changes, then it tells me he's perfectly fine with it.
It's so tough because like we're from an outside perspective, obviously, right? So like we don't have any bias, right? Like for me, it's like whoever starts at will is who starts at will. Like I don't have a personal relationship with the guys that are in this conversation, right? Coaches obviously do. In theory, Rob, you would expect Marcus Freeman being a former very good linebacker at Ohio State and NFL football player that got drafted by the Chicago Bears in the 5th round. You would expect that he understands that linebackers last year weren't great. You would expect Al Golden, who just coached in the Super Bowl 2 years ago and did a really good job as a linebacker coach for the Cincinnati Bengals. You would think that he would understand that. But sometimes when you're too close, you lose sight of that stuff. Sometimes that happens, man.
Right.
So, and I don't have any personal relationships with any of these players, right? Like at the end of the day, whoever is the best player, in my opinion, should play. But sometimes it's not as easy as that. It should be, but sometimes it's not when you're too close.
Hey, and look, Marcus Freeman's not going to call me and be like, hey, here's my opinion of the linebackers. I can assure you of that. I wish he would, but I promise you he's not. So I don't have a clue what he thinks about the play of the linebackers. So no idea. We'll find out this spring. That's what we'll see. We'll find out this spring.
Yep.
Got one from ND Estimate Trucking LLC.
I love it, man. I hope that at some point Audric Estime is in a Heisman campaign because this is something to work off right here.
Yes.
Mailbag question from Estimate Trucking LLC. In Al Golden's version of the defense, are the defensive tackles penetrating on rundowns or occupying blockers for the linebacker unit primarily? I mean, yeah, they're occupying, which is why it's a really frustrating thing because when you look at the defensive tackles Notre Dame has, especially the starters in Howard Cross, Riley Mills, it tells you attack style penetration.
It was true last year too, Ryan, with Jason Adamiola and Jacob Lacey early. They were all penetrators. None of them are eat space guys. They're
all 285 or less pounds, all three of those guys, right? And in that instance, you would expect, I'm going to create chaos. Right? Like you don't want Jason Adamalola anchoring against double teams all the time. That's not what doesn't play into his strengths. His strengths are you're a one gap penetrator. Get in the backfield, create chaos, let linebackers pick up where you kind of weren't able to clean up. That's kind of what you want to be in that defense. But last year we've talked about it. You wanted guys to you were having Howard Cross, play two blockers a ton, two gap a ton, anchor against double teams at 265, 270 pounds. Like, that's just not advantageous for the best version of Howard Cross. So should be an attack style defense based upon what you have right now, but that's not what we have seen so far. So hopefully we see a little bit different in 2023, but who knows at this point.
Yep. Got another one from Indy Estimate Trucking.
IB, with all Notre Dame has on the defensive line moving forward, who can potentially be the most likely to reach 10-plus sacks in the next 2 to 4 years, in your opinion?
Take the two Vipers we talked about most today, and that's your pick. That's your two guys. It's Patelho and Burnham.
That would definitely be my answer in 2023, especially if someone said, like, who's the 10-sack guy? Jordan Patello would be my answer. That's most likely, right? I mean,
the only one I'm saying right now. I mean,
yeah.
I don't think anybody else has 10-plus sack, and I don't really care about 10-plus sack potential. I really don't. To me, it's about total team sacks and consistent pressures. And I've said this before. I think sacks are a very overrated statistic if not provided in the proper context. And you could have 4 sacks in a game and you weren't really super disruptive as a pass rushing unit. You had like a sack at the end of the first half, a sack when the game was out of hand and you knew they were passing, and then 2 3rd and 11 sacks that killed drives. It's about consistency from a pass rushing standpoint. I want to see a team that can consistently get after the quarterback. And to me, that matters a lot more than total sacks. I mean, look, do you know who led the nation in sacks last year, Ryan?
I do, yes. It was
as a team.
As a team. Yeah. I do not know who led as a team. No.
Louisville. It was Louisville.
Interesting.
Yeah. The top 3 teams in the nation last year in sacks were Power 5, Louisville, Pitt, and Clemson.
Pitt makes sense. Yeah.
Yes. Do you know how many 10-plus, how many double? And actually, I'll give it to you this way, Ryan, because this proves my point even better. If you look at the top 4 Power 5 teams in the nation last year in sacks, I don't know. Let's go even deeper. Let's go top 5. Okay. Top 5 Power 5 teams in sacks last year: Louisville, Pitt, Clemson, Penn State, Arkansas. Do you know how many of those teams, how many players out of that group Shoot, I'm going to number 6 to Utah. I'm doing more research. How many of those teams had a guy, or how many players on those teams total had 10 or more sacks on those top 6 Power 5 teams in the country in team sacks? How many 10-plus sack players were on those teams combined?
I think Yasir Abdullah from Louisville had 9.5. I think Drew Sanders had 9.5. So I'm going to say 0. Yeah.
0. Yeah. Not a single guy. Now, Louisville was number 1. They had, as you said, the kid from Louisville had 9.5. Yaya Diaby had 9. Monty Montgomery had 6. Ashton Gillette had 6. Momo Sanogo had 4.5. Desmond, you see the point, right? Yeah. Spread around. Pitt was number 2. Servosia Dennis had 7, and Kalijah Cansey had 7. Deslin Alexander had 5.5. But again, 48 team sacks spread around. Clemson's was number 3 at 44. Their highest sack guys were Miles Murphy and Jeremiah Trotter at 6.5, were the highest that they had. Number 4 was Penn State. Their leading guy in sacks last year was a linebacker with 6.5. Number
Carter.
5, Abdul Carter. Arkansas at number 5. They had Drew Sanders at 9.5. Jordan Dominic had 7.5. And then after that, 4.5 or fewer for a team that had 42 sacks. And then Utah last year had 41 sacks as a team. Their leader in sacks had 5.5 sacks.
That's wild.
So again, now Notre Dame had a guy with more sacks than all of them. Yep. Notre Dame was actually not that bad. They were 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th. They were 9th in the country last year amongst Power 5 teams in sacks, tied with Alabama, tied with Alabama. And Notre Dame had a guy. Their guy had more sacks than any of them, right?
Wild.
I mean, Isaiah Foskey had more sacks than any of them. Isaiah Foskey and Will Anderson. If you look at the top 7 or 8 teams in team sacks, USC had a guy, Alabama had a guy, and Notre Dame had a guy. Top 6 teams in sacks did not have a guy. 7, 8, 9 did, but the top 6 did not.
I think Tuli Tuipulotu from USC, he was the leading sacker in the country, right? If I remember correctly, like 13 or something. 13
he was close. Yeah, he was up there. Let me see, Ryan. He did finish with 13.5. Ryan, there was only 10, 11, 12, 13. There's only 14 guys in all of college football last year that had 10+ sacks.
Yep.
That's it. My point being, you don't have to have a guy that 10+ sacks to have a great pass rush.
You don't.
You can have a guy with 10+ sacks and not have a great pass rush.
Usually it's better when it's spread around, to be honest. Like usually if you have one guy populating it, that means that other guys aren't finishing. You know what I mean? Like that's kind of where it is.
Right. I mean, look, last year Eastern Michigan ranked 83rd in the country in team sacks, but Jose Ramirez was 2nd in the nation in individual sack. That was not a good pass rushing team, but they had an individual who got a lot of sacks, right? Yep. And so the point is that you don't necessarily the number 3 sacker in the country was a kid from Fresno State, and Fresno State last year ranked 47th in the nation. He was tied with a kid from Central Michigan who ranked 35th.
I love that kid from Fresno State's name, David Perilous. Great name.
Point is, just because you have a guy with 10+ sacks doesn't mean your defense is good at rushing the passer. If anything, I'd like to see it spread around even more, to be honest with you. And
it even makes sense. It even says the NFL, Brian, ask the San Francisco 49ers about their pass rush right now. It's Nick Bosa and nothing, man. Right. Like he had like 17 sacks and the next closest guy was like 5. You know what I mean? Like they just don't have those guys.
And so now it's nice to have that guy and have a bunch of sacks like Oklahoma State had the year before with Colin Oliver had a 10+ sacks, but then the rest of the team had a lot of sacks. That's obviously an ideal situation because you'd like to have that one guy that can take a game over in the 4. That's what made Isaiah Foskey so good in 2021. And at times this year, but Isaiah had clutch sacks in 2021. Yeah, clutch pressures, and it's the consistency that matters to me. But if you're to your question, if you're going to talk about a guy that can have 10+ sacks, it's the top 2 Vipers or the top 2 talented guys of Viper. I don't know if Junior's a 10+ sack guy. He's in that conversation as well. I don't know if any of the big ends are 10+ sack guys. None of the defense. I mean, it's so hard to be a defensive tackle and get sacks, like 10+ sacks in college football right now. It's just you're just not going to see it a whole lot. I mean, I'm looking at it now. I mean, I'm trying to see if any of these kids that were 10+ sack guys last year were big guys. I mean, Thomas Incoom was
He's a defensive
265.
end. Yeah.
Yeah, Jonah Tavai from San Diego State was an interior guy,
He's
right?
the interior guy, yeah.
Yeah, he was at 10.5, but again, that's at San Diego State. You know, like you don't see really any Power 5 guys that are really racking up a mess of sacks. Dylan Horton, he's a three.
Man.
He's a 3-3 end, so he's kind of an interior-ish kind of guy, but not really. He's not like a 3 technique, so you just don't see that a whole lot, Ryan. You just don't see a lot of interior guys racking up a mess of sacks. You want to see as a group, you want to see a lot of production there. That's really the key.
I mean, think about some of the top defensive linemen that have come out of the draft the last couple of years. Like Jalen Carter wasn't a big sack guy. He's a penetration guy, though. Like he creates havoc. That's really what you want. Brian Bresee wasn't a big sack guy at Clemson. But they have an impact that goes beyond raw sack numbers. I mean, Brian, do you remember Ezekiel Ansah that came out of BYU that played with the Lions? He was the master of racking up sacks in like 1 or 2 games a year and then doing nothing the rest of the year. It's also like, that doesn't matter. He's not consistently affecting the game on a week-to-week basis. It doesn't matter, man.
Yeah, those just don't mean a whole lot. It's the consistency of pressures. Well, it's like this year. Ryan and I have said Isaiah Foskey just wasn't as impactful as he was last year. And you're like, wait a minute, he had more tackles for loss and he had more sacks than he did. I'm like, yeah, I know, I get that, but he just wasn't as good of a player, in my opinion. I mean, it's just like you can talk to me all you want about the sacks, but the sacks are only going to take you so far. You know, I mean, and I mean, you see it too, is like just because you're athletic doesn't mean you're going to be a great player either. I mean, Jason Owe had 0 sacks his last year at Penn State. It still blows my mind,
wild,
and so give me a guy that's consistently disruptive. And that's going to be the key for me.
Danielle Hunter is turned into one of the best pass rushers in the NFL when he's healthy too. He had like 3.5 sacks in his career at LSU. It's just like, what, man? What?
Yeah, it's wild, man. You see stuff like that happen, and you're just like, what in the heck?
Yeah.
Where did that come from?
Seriously.
I mean, his last year now here's the thing. He was disruptive though.
Yeah.
I mean, his last year at LSU had 13 tackles for loss. He only had 1.5 sacks. The year before that, he had 3 sacks and 8 tackles for loss. And I mean, so again, and he left early, but like, I would rather a guy have 13 tackles for loss and 1 sack than 6 sacks and 6 tackles for loss, meaning he made no run game production.
We've seen way too much of that at Notre Dame over the last few years too.
That's how Adi Tagumbo Ogundeji was. He had 7 sacks and 7 tackles for loss. Like and he was more disruptive because he did a lot of things where he would force stuff outside, and Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah would clean it up for tackle for loss, right?
Sure.
So, but you still want to see like Khalid Kareem never had more than 4.5 5 sacks in Notre Dame, but he had 10+ tackles for losses last 2 years. That's what I want to see. I want to see more of that. I want to see more of the if all that I get this year from Javonte Jean-Baptiste is 3 sacks. It gives me 9 tackles for loss. Give me that over 6 sacks and 6 tackles for loss, or 7 tackles for loss of the combined numbers. I still wish they would do it both. I wish they would separate the numbers. I hate when they combine them together. So, like 8 tackles for loss and 3 sacks should be 8 tackles for loss and 3 sacks, not 11 tackles for loss and 3 sacks. It's just my little pet peeve, but it is what it is. David Jones. Here we got another one, Ryan.
This question is, with all the talk about how much Al Golden needs to stop calling the D to show how smart he is and scheme to what best utilizes the talent they have, do you feel Marcus Freeman and Al Golden have had that conversation? Maybe. I mean, who knows?
We have no evidence.
We'll never know. We'll never know.
Well, I think we'll know if we see something different this spring and in the fall. I mean, that's when we'll know. Because I don't know if Al Golden's necessarily going to do it all by himself, but I'm sure he's going to have some level of self-evaluation, but the head coach has to step up. I mean, that's just where it I hope it happened, but I have no evidence one way or the other on it, Ryan, to be honest with you. We on from Rob Thidoff.
This question is, Brian and Ryan, what is one thing you do not want to hear during spring practice and one thing you do want to hear during spring practice. I mean, what I don't want to hear, Brian, is I don't want to hear that guys aren't getting a legitimate shot and an opportunity, right? Like some of the guys we've talked about, some of the younger guys, for instance, like what you don't hear is worse than sometimes than what you do hear, right? It's like if I don't hear Joshua Burnham's name throughout the spring, it's not good, man. If I don't hear his name at all, that's just not a good sign. If I don't hear Aiden Gabira's name, if I don't hear Nolan Ziegler's name, that's a bad sign. So I think usually the intel that you do get is more of who aren't you hearing about? But, on a positive level, obviously, is like, why am I not hearing that name more? Because either that is the guys didn't progress or they're not given a fair shake. And either way, it's troubling.
Good.
Yeah.
What I want to hear is a lot about younger players. To your point, that means guys are pushing, guys are being given a chance to push. What I don't want to hear is that the offense is just dominating the defense in the run game all spring. That's a big concern. I want to see back and forth battles. I really do. Because I don't think this line right now is the 2017 line where, they would just dominate the defense in just about every practice we saw. And you start thinking MST line's going to suck. And then you talk to Mike Elko and he's like, no, we're actually doing all right. It's just these guys are freaking ridiculous. Like he would always say like, no, we're going to be all right. We're going to be all right. And I just don't, he knew what we didn't know yet of how dominant that line was going to be. He saw it every day, and it was huge. It was a huge offensive line too. Like Tommy Kramer on the 2017 line was the fourth biggest starting offensive lineman. Fourth, Tommy Kramer. So, because Bars was over 320, Q was over 340, McGlinchey was around 320. I mean, it was a massive offensive line. And I think this one will be as well. But I don't want to hear it every day because I don't think the line is there yet to be that kind of group, in my opinion. So that's definitely what I don't want to hear.
Yeah, this line is going to be massive to your point though, man. It's going to be a big group, very big group.
Yep. Got one from Timeout Tom.
Question from Time. Yep, and his question is, what can we see differently with Max Bulla as the GA linebacker coach? How much influence will he have on who plays?
Well, I don't think he has any influence on who plays. That's the defensive coordinator's going to make that call. But here's the one advantage that Max Bulla brings to the table. He's actually coached football before, and that's no disrespect to James Laurinaitis. I'm sure the longer he stays in it, he's going to be a very good football coach. I have no doubt in my mind. But he was kind of thrown into the fire, and from what I'm told, Al Washington treated him as the linebackers coach, and then he just kind of wandered. He thought he was that's wrong. That's on Al. That's Al Golden's fault. That guy's never coached football before. Yeah. You needed to be more involved in that. You're asking that guy to take that linebacker room and treat it as if he's been a football coach for 10 years. And that's on him. At least Max Bulla has been a football coach for 3 years. You know what I mean? At Alabama. So there's a little bit of an advantage. But at the end of the day, Al Golden knows too much football and knows too much about coaching linebackers to not be more involved. I'm sorry. He just does. Yeah. I'm not going to blame a GA for why the linebacker plays him better when Al Golden needs to have a bigger role in that. As simple as that. Simple as that.
Al Golden's name is on the table, man, at the point, right? Like how the linebackers play is a direct result of what he did or didn't do as a coach, right? Like that's all. That's the person that gets blamed. I'm not blaming Max Bulla for them not developing properly.
GA, right? And I don't mean that disrespectfully, but like, dude's not making the money you are. Dude's been barely out of playing in the NFL. You're the 50-something-year-old, been coaching for 30 years, high-paid defensive coordinator who is also should be the linebacker, should be more involved. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't allow that guy to have a role. Clark Lee allowed Nick Lazinski to have a big role in coaching the linebackers, but he was still there every day coaching the linebackers as well. Totally fine with that. Mike Elko had an assistant who he allowed to take the safeties and work with the safeties at different times, but he was still there as the coaching the safeties. That's what it needs to be.
He's a massive resource. That's what he is. Like he's a massive resource. Utilize him correctly is the big thing.
Right. And so, like when the linebackers had a bad game under Clark Lee, I wasn't blaming Nick Lazinski. Sure. Clark Lee's the linebackers coach. Same thing here, in my opinion. All right, Ryan, I'm going to read this one because I'm going to ask you your opinion on this because you follow the NFL closer than I do. But Archer452 says, Aaron Rodgers has confirmed that he plans to play for the Jets next year. Does he make New York a contender in a stacked AFC?
He makes them a contender in the AFC East because, Brian, I mean, Jets played pretty solid football last year with a dumpster fire at quarterback, man. They had Mike White and Zach Wilson playing quarterback for them last year, and it was bad. Aaron Rodgers is definitely on the downtrots. He's on the downside of his career, but he is better than what they had at quarterback in 2022. Like, there's no doubt about that. So, yeah, I think that they compete for the AFC East. The Dolphins have a good roster in theory coming back, but Tua's been injured obviously a lot throughout his career. I don't think anybody's going to overtake the Bills with Josh Allen, obviously, but to be in the conversation going into late November and into December and maybe getting a wild card spot, I think that that's a big potential for the New York Jets. So I think that they have that opportunity. They have the potential. I think they could be the second best team in the AFC East with Aaron Rodgers as quarterback.
That's interesting. They went 7-10 last year, right?
Yep.
And had, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 games decided by 8 points or less. So 1 score or less. It's not too bad. And they were a lot of their losses were like low scoring games, 27-22, stuff like that.
And they were off to a good start to the year, and then they just faded down the stretch because their quarterback play just got so bad, man. Like, it was just awful down the stretch.
I'm looking at this. They were 5-2, 6-3 at one point.
Yeah, man. They weren't playing. They were playing good football, and then Zach Wilson
beat the Packers 27-10.
Yeah. Seriously.
In a game in which Zach Wilson went 10 of 18 for 110 yards. Your boy Breece Hall had 116 yards in that game.
Yeah, man. Breece Hall's a good football player, man.
Yes,
Too bad he got injured last year, but he's a good football player.
Is he going to be back this year? How bad was the injury? I think
it was an ACL, so he should be back. He should be back, yeah.
We got one from Josh Buffo, the motivational business banker.
With the safety depth pieces, have Notre Dame increase recruiting on Peyton Woodyard? Is there a chance? Thank you guys for best Notre Dame content in the business. Thank you for that, sir.
They're still trying, but it's going to be hard to flip him from Georgia. They're trying. Yeah. It's just I don't look, with everything they had working in their advantage, they still couldn't get him before. The only way I see him flipping is if Georgia just starts loading up at safety and they're like, yeah, Peyton's not as good as the other guys we have. And so, we'll move on from him. I don't see that happening to me.
Yeah. The one thing I love about Peyton, I actually talked to him the other day. Great kid, man. Really, Peyton Woodyard is a great young man. Very no, sir. Yes, sir. Very respectful. Met him down at the All-American Bowl in San Antonio when he committed to Georgia. I'll say this, Josh. I think that for me, I don't think Peyton made a rush decision. I think he thought about it a lot. I know he has a great support system with his family. I think that he's going to be a hard kid to flip by anybody, to be honest. I think that he's very strong on his commitment to Georgia.
Agree. I'm going to read this next one, Ryan, because this is more for you. It's an NFL question from Josh Buffo, the motivational business banker. Who is Josh Burnham's comp from the NFL, past or present?
First thing that popped in my head, and it was a weird one. I wasn't expecting this one, Brian, but Connor Barwin. Do you remember Connor Barwin?
Yeah, he's working in the Eagles front office now, right?
Yeah, I believe so. And Barwin was a really good pass rusher, but then the best year that he actually had on the Philadelphia Eagles was when he only had 5 or 6 sacks, because he did a little bit of everything, which I think Joshua Burnham could bring to the game. He dropped into coverage a ton that year, set the edge. He was playing some Sam linebacker that one year for the Philadelphia Eagles. And I think body type-wise, they're similar-ish. If I remember correctly, Connor Barwin's 6'4", 260, somewhere in that ballpark.
6'4", 256 with 33 3/4-inch arms at the combine.
Yeah. So I think all-around profile, can do a little bit of everything, can be an impactful pass rusher when that's the role he's in. Yeah. But the great thing about Joshua Burnham, in my opinion, is that he can assume a few different roles, right? He can provide some upside in a lot of different areas. And that's what Connor Barwin brought to the game. Yeah. Very underrated football player.
A very underrated athlete too, Ryan. I mean, he 40 wasn't great, 4.66 flat, but he had a 10.8 broad, 40.5-inch vertical, 6.8 7.3 cone, 4.18 shuttle.
It's not bad, man.
That's not bad. Nuts for a 260-pound guy. That's really, really good.
Guys, what does twitchy mean? That's that right there. That's Twitch.
And that's why I like that. I think that thought never crossed my mind about Connor Barwin, but as soon as you say it, the light goes off. You're like, yes, that is a very good one. That is a very good one. I like that one a lot, Ryan. And and again, I don't know about the NFL. I didn't pay attention to him as much in the NFL, but Connor Barwin was a really good college defensive end for 2 years at Cincinnati.
He was a really good NFL player too, for a couple different teams.
He played on the basketball team at Cincinnati.
He's a freak, man.
Yeah, like
Cincinnati had a few of those guys, Brian. They had
Yeah.
him. They had a young Jason Kelsey, who was like a former tight end defensive lineman or whatever. Travis Kelsey was like a kind of a raw kid. Like they've had some of those twitchy pass rushers and talents.
Yeah, Brian Kelly inherited a couple dudes because he was there before Brian Kelly got there. But his last year, here's what's crazy. Connor Barwin went from doing nothing in college. His first 3 years of college, he had a total of 13 tackles, 0 tackles for loss, 0 sacks. And then his last year, he breaks out and has 14 and a half tackles for loss and 11 sacks. And he put up the numbers that we talked about. So, yeah, he was a freaky athlete. Very freaky athlete, in my opinion. So, yeah, I like that one.
And he did a lot of the dirty work, too, which I think Burnham can do a lot of that, too. You know, like the physical, tough stuff that people underrate a little bit, but is important.
Yep. All right, we got one from I just need to say this one, Ryan. I love this name.
Okay.
You can read the question, but Shamrocks and Shenanigans. I love that name. We have some very creative names here. I love it.
Sounds like that could be a TV show, man. I like that a lot. Question is from Shamrocks and Shenanigans. I had to say it too, just for some fun. What's the significance, if any, of Georgia's self-reported violations in subsequent rumored investigation into the program on the part of the NCAA?
I don't know a lot about it, to be honest with you. I haven't heard anything about any of that. So I'm looking at ESPN right now, and I don't see anything about Georgia in that regard. So
it's always an interesting conversation when things are self-reported as well.
I mean, there's literally nothing on ESPN about them self-reporting anything. So I don't know the specifics of what that would be. But knowing the NCAA, it's an SEC school. They're going to do a dang thing. And I don't even know what they did, if they even deserve to have anything done. So I'm not even commenting on that. But even if it was something severe, I don't see the NCAA doing anything. They're cowards. And they're definitely not going to do it to a team like Georgia. No. Now, look, here's what's going to happen. If Georgia gets found guilty of something, they're going to put Georgia State on probation for something. That's what will happen. They'll find something at Georgia State or Georgia Southern and be like, we can't have this. You know, you gave a kid a couple extra lunches. You can't have that. We got to put you on probation. You know, because we got to show that we're tough. We're going to hammer the teams that nobody cares about, right? Yeah. Hey, NIL violations out the yin yang. Let's hammer Miami women's basketball. Let's go after them. Yeah. Okay, good call. Good job, guys. Good job. All right, here we go, Ryan.
From Bailey Brad, once spring practice starts, what would make you more optimistic, hearing the offense is dominating or hearing that the defense is?
That the offense is.
Yeah.
Because I think the defense is going to be pretty good. I mean, look, again, what did we say yesterday? Our issue on defense is not, are they going to suck or not? Because they didn't suck last year. They were a good defense last year. They were a good top 35 caliber defense last year. That's good.
Yep.
Right? There's a lot of teams that would love to have a defense like Notre Dame's. Is it good enough to win a championship? But the defense, based on last year's performance, is much closer than the offense is right now. I mean, much closer. So if we're hearing that, like, the receivers are out there making plays,
that's the key.
Yeah, that's huge.
I'll even break it down a little bit more, because you just hit on it, Brian. I want to hear that the wide receivers are balling out in the spring, because that's one position for Notre Dame's defense that is going to be pretty good as long as everyone's healthy, right? Like, those corners are guys, man. Even with Cam Hart not playing, you're still going to have Benjamin Morrison, Jaden Mickey, and the rest of the crew at cornerback, Christian Gray and Brian Barnes, Chance Tucker. Like, if the wide receivers are balling out in the spring, that's a very good sign for the offense. Like, an incredibly good sign.
I hope that we see a lot of what we saw in the spring leading up to the 2018 season, the last time Notre Dame had arguably the best cornerback tandem in college football. And I say arguably because the Clemson tandem was really good that year as well, with Trayvon Mullen and AJ
Terrell.
Terrell, yeah.
But
all spring, they just got abused. All spring by Chase Claypool and Miles Boykin. They just got abused. I mean, like, the quarterbacks were just Ian Book. If Ian Book threw back shoulders in games like he did in college, like he did in practice, he'd have been such a better player. Such a better player. They just throw it up to him all practice, and there's just nothing Troy Pride and Julian Love could do about it. Nothing. Because you got these 6'4" guys with super long arms. You just couldn't defend. And so that would make me very happy. If I'm hearing that Dion and those guys are going off, that would make me very, very happy. Very, very happy. Last few, we get through some of these here real quick, Ryan. I'm going to ask you this one here. From Irish Gordian Knot. When Clarence Lewis enters the draft, will being a little positionless help or hurt his draft stock?
I don't think it actually hurts, to be honest, because like when we're talking about Clarence Lewis, the positionless stuff, in my opinion, from my experience, is when we're talking about a high caliber football player. Like that was a little unsettling about like Isaiah Simmons, for instance, right? He was a kid that you're like on the NFL level, the overhang position doesn't matter as much because they take that guy out of the game. Like, can he play stacks? Can he play a weak inside linebacker? And it was something that he didn't really do at Clemson. But when you're a fringe draftable potentially guy or a guy on the back end of the roster, the more you can do is so valuable. So the fact that Clarence has played corner, maybe could play safety, has played inside at nickel, that will actually feed into his upside and his ability to stick on a roster. For the guys that are going to be late drafted, priority free agent types, that's where you need to excel. The more you can do, the more opportunity you have to stick.
Absolutely. Got a few more here, Ryan, that we'll wrap up through here. Here's one from Irish Gordian Knott.
What kind of stats does Sam Hartman have to put up in week 1 to make you rank Notre Dame in the top 4 after week 1?
900 yards and 11 touchdowns. And they win 112. I mean, honestly, Notre Dame has no business being in the top 4 until after the Ohio State game. None.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, I'm beating NC State on the road, get you in the top 7 or 8, no doubt.
Yeah.
But a team that went 9-4 last year, I don't care who they got coming back, you got to prove it on the field. You went 9-4, you lost to Marshall and Stanford. Until you beat Ohio State, you don't belong in the top 4. You don't. And then after you beat Ohio State, you don't belong in that conversation until after you play USC and Clemson. You got to beat both of them and be 11-1 to be in that conversation. So now, if they come out and win the first game 100-0, I'm being hyperbolic, and the next game 75-0. Okay, sure, we can have that conversation, but there's nothing Sam Hartman can do in the opener, or this team can do for me to say this team belongs in the top 4. Nothing. It's all about, you got to prove it on the field, and there's teams that have just consistent. Now, look, I know every year's different, but you got to start somewhere, and at the beginning of the year, I'm going to give more benefit of the doubt to the teams that have proven it on a consistent basis, and teams that beat Notre Dame last year. I'm sorry, I'm just going to.
So sometimes we lose our minds over the first game of the season too, when you don't know how good the team you're playing is, right? Like maybe Navy is the best Navy team that we've seen the last couple of years, or maybe they absolutely suck. Like we have no idea the first game of the season. You have no idea.
It's also true if Notre Dame doesn't play well in the opener. It's the same thing. Oh, they don't belong on top 25. Just don't overreact to the first game. Just get the W, play well, and move on to the next one and get better. That's what I want to see. Here's one from USMA 87.
Question is, how possible is it for Notre Dame's offense to score a minimum of 30 points in every game? Not average at least 30 points per game, but have at least 30 points in every game.
0. I don't know if there's any possibility of that.
That would be tough.
I mean, look, here's the deal. The 2019 LSU team that was just unworldly good on offense did not do that. They scored 23 points against Auburn. I mean, even they didn't do it. I'm very curious. The Oklahoma team in 2008, I think also was that way. Ryan, let me go look at them. I don't think they scored.
You're going to have an off game eventually. You're going to have an off game.
That team actually, that team scored every regular season game. They were in the 30s, 40s or more, but then they get in the championship game. They scored 14 the championship game. So that's going to be really hard to do, man. Really hard to do. I mean, I'm sure there's been some team that's done it recently. I'm sure, but I don't think that's where Notre Dame is. I mean, if they do though, that'd be great. I mean,
if they do that, then they're scoring high 30s, maybe close.
I think Bama might have done it in 20. Let me look real quick. Bama might have done it in 20. Bama did it in 20. The funny thing is, their lowest scoring output of the season was 31 against Notre Dame.
That's wild.
And then their next lowest was 38 against Missouri. And that's a team that averaged 48.5 points per game. So it's for Notre Dame, it's rare. It's rare. I'm not worried about that to me. Now, if they do it, this is going to be a playoff team.
Oh, yeah.
If they score at least 30 points in every game, this team will go undefeated to be a playoff team.
They'll probably win a championship if they do that. Like, it's probably to that point.
Last 2 questions, Ryan. Here's one from Josh Buffo, the motivational business banker.
His question is, what 2 Notre Dame defensive players could you plug into a 2023 projected defense that would make them a top 5 defense, and why those players? Former Notre Dame players, I guess, are working from, right?
I mean, Jalen Smith.
Harrison
is a no-brainer
Smith
for me.
Pops into my head.
I'd say Jalen Smith and Stephon Tuitt is where I'm going to go. And here's why. Give me Stephon Tuitt at big end and Jalen Smith at will. with the current team, this is an elite defense. I mean, an elite defense.
Yeah.
That's an easy one for me.
Two names that popped into my head were Harrison Smith at safety.
Rover.
And maybe Rover in this system. Good point. That's true. You're not wrong there. Harrison Smith somewhere in the back end, or maybe at Rover, or Justin Tuck was another name that popped in my head. Maybe just some more pass rush. I mean, honestly, Justin Tuck could probably be a big end in this system as well. He had kind of that size profile. So somewhere up front and then the back end. Linebacker, again, it would just come down to are they going to be used properly? Are you going to use Jalen Smith properly? That's my biggest question,
Yeah.
So.
The thing for me, Ryan, is the only reason I don't go with Harrison is he's phenomenal because I just don't think you need an elite player like him at safety to have an elite defense. You need elite front seven guys. And if you have Jalen Smith on one end, at linebacker with J.D. Bertrand, I mean, that'd be the best Mike Jalen ever played with in college by a mile.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? And then you'd have Batelho and Burnham at the opposite end. You'd have Riley Mills inside with Stephon Tuitt at big end. Are you kidding me? Yeah, that would be one heck of a defense. And then last one here from Salty Virginia Peanuts. Let's get to the last one here, Ryan.
Salty's question is, will Clemson's apparent intent to switch to a Tennessee-style air raid and tempo be more of a problem for them or Notre Dame by the time they play? It's a great question.
This year, it won't be a problem for them or Notre Dame, in my opinion. I just don't know if they have the receivers to look like Tennessee did last year. Right. It's not really a Tennessee-style air raid. It's going to look a lot like what they did at SMU and TCU the last few years, right? It's going to look like what his brother does. It won't necessarily look like Tennessee as much. I think they're going to run the ball a little bit more than Tennessee does, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So I think it'll be a little bit more balanced, but they don't have the receivers right now that scare the mess out of me like Cedric Tillman and Jalen Hyatt did as a tandem. And
that's true.
And as much as I like Cade Klubnik, he's not going to be Hendon Hooker right yet.
Right.
I'd be more concerned.
Hendon Hooker. Right.
Get me to 2024 and get Cade Klubnik a year under his belt. Then Clemson could be really scary on offense if Garrett Riley's as good as we think he's going to be. But they've got to get a little bit better at the skill positions on the perimeter, Ryan, or before I'm ready to kind of go to that length with that defense. Again, Notre Dame played against teams like that last year and held their own. I mean, teams that just throw the football didn't rip Notre Dame up. The only team that had success that way was USC. USC is really the only good team that had success against Notre Dame offensively last year, and that was because they were balanced. Their run game and Caleb Williams scrambling all around is what hurt Notre Dame. The pass game didn't hurt Notre Dame. And they did that without Cam Hart and Tariq Bracy. So Notre Dame's pass defense last year was a lot better than people give it credit for. A lot better. And the safeties played a lot better than people give them credit for. It's just, I just want to see the younger guys playing a little bit, like Ramon and Xavier playing a little bit more. So anyway, that's going to be the last question for today, everybody. Great questions and comments. Very, very good stuff. Ryan, that was a fun show. Obviously, really good stuff here today. We're going to be back. Actually tonight, Vince and Sean will have the midweek mailbag at Irish Breakdown on the IB Nation Sports Talk Show. And they will be able to answer more of your questions. So they'll have that tonight. Ryan and I'll be back tomorrow at 1:00 for more Irish Breakdown stuff. And of course, before you leave, folks, we would love it if you'd sign up for the message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. We'd really appreciate that. Come join our family over there. Help support Irish Breakdown. And we would love to have you with us. And really enjoy just sort of that season, or just enjoy what we're doing over there. It'll be a lot of fun, and a lot of good intel, a lot of good talk. If you sign up, and that's boards.irishbreakdown.com, you can sign up for a monthly membership. You can sign up for an annual membership. You can join one of our booster clubs. We have the gold, the shamrock, and the blue are all the different clubs. Definitely check all those out. You can find that at boards.irishbreakdown.com. And before you get out, folks, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, and enjoy tonight's show on IB Nation Sports Talk with Vince and Sean. Definitely want to check that out. Thanks for being with us, everybody, on the Irish Breakdown podcast.